On quiet nights, when the world feels softer and the sounds of the day slowly drift away, it can be pleasant to travel in the mind to places that have long since faded into history. Far beyond the busy streets and familiar homes of the present, there once stood a land shaped by the gentle rhythm of a great river. Day after day, year after year, the waters of the Nile moved steadily beneath the warm skies of northeastern Africa, bringing life to villages, cities, temples, and fields. The people who lived there watched the seasons carefully. They listened to the birds along the riverbanks and measured time by the movement of the stars overhead. They rose with the first light of morning and rested when the cool air of evening finally returned. Their world was filled with the quiet sounds of everyday life. The grinding of grain. The rustling of linen clothing. The distant laughter of children playing beside narrow streets. The low voices of merchants speaking in busy markets. And somewhere, carried gently by the breeze, the sound of music from a small harp or a simple flute. This was ancient Egypt. For thousands of years, kingdoms rose and fell along the Nile. Pharaohs came and went. Great monuments were built from stone. Temples reached toward the sky. Scribes carefully wrote words upon papyrus. Farmers worked patiently beneath the sun. Sailors guided wooden boats along the river. Priests offered prayers within peaceful halls lit by the glow of oil lamps. And among the many rulers remembered by history, there were remarkable women whose strength, wisdom, and determination left lasting marks upon the land they loved. Their stories unfolded slowly, just as the Nile itself flowed slowly. Some lived in times of peace, while others faced years filled with uncertainty. Some were mothers, wives, and daughters before becoming queens. Others stepped forward when their people needed calm and stability. They lived in grand palaces surrounded by gardens and pools, but they also carried responsibilities that stretched across an entire kingdom. Tonight, the sands of Egypt seem peaceful again. The moonlight falls softly across ancient stones. The desert winds whisper quietly across forgotten roads. And somewhere beyond the horizon of memory, the lives of powerful queens wait patiently to be remembered. Long before many of the famous queens known today were born, generations of women had already helped shape Egyptian life. Their names were sometimes carved into temple walls. Sometimes they appeared in paintings, wearing elegant linen dresses and beautiful jewelry made from gold, turquoise, and bright stones brought from distant lands. Egyptian women held important places within their society. They could own property. They could manage homes and estates. They could inherit wealth. They could make agreements and oversee family affairs. In many ways, they enjoyed rights that women in other ancient lands would not experience for many centuries. The home itself was considered a place of comfort and order. Many houses were made from mud bricks dried beneath the sun. The walls helped keep the heat outside during the hottest days. Roofs were flat, and families often gathered there during cooler evenings. Meals were simple but nourishing. Bread, onions, figs, dates, fish, and vegetables filled wooden bowls placed upon woven mats. Fresh water from the Nile supported life everywhere. During the annual flooding season, rich black soil spread across the land. Farmers welcomed these waters with gratitude. Without the river, Egypt would have been surrounded by endless dry desert. But with the Nile, fields of wheat and barley stretched across the countryside, and villages flourished beneath the warmth of the sun. Each morning, as sunlight slowly painted the eastern sky with shades of gold and pink, ordinary people began their daily work. Potters shaped clay vessels. Bakers prepared bread. Weavers created fine linen cloth. Scribes sat patiently with brushes and ink, recording information that would one day become precious windows into the past. The world around them moved with gentle routines. and within that world stood the royal families. Palaces were places of beauty and careful design. Pools filled with lotus flowers reflected the sunlight. Date palms swayed quietly in the breeze. Fragrant oils and perfumes scented the rooms. Servants moved respectfully through shaded halls. Painted walls showed scenes of birds, flowers, and life beside the river. Yet behind the beauty of these surroundings rested great responsibilities. A ruler was expected to maintain harmony. Egyptians believed deeply in balance and order. They called this principle ma'at. To them, harmony was not simply an idea. It was the foundation upon which life itself depended. Good harvests, peaceful seasons, successful trade, and the happiness of the people all depended upon maintaining this sacred balance. Queens often played important roles in preserving that harmony. They appeared beside kings during ceremonies. They participated in religious traditions. They oversaw large households and estates. Some advised their husbands. Some guided their sons. And in times of difficulty, some stepped into positions of remarkable authority. Many centuries before the world would hear the names Hatshepsut or Cleopatra, another queen emerged during a time when Egypt itself faced uncertainty. Her name was Ahotep. The land she knew was not peaceful. Foreign rulers known today as the Hyksos controlled parts of Egypt. Their influence had spread across the north, while Egyptian rulers held power in the south. The country was divided. Families worried about the future. Soldiers prepared for battles. Messengers traveled dusty roads carrying news from one city to another. Even during troubled times, life continued. Women baked bread in clay ovens. Children chased one another beneath the shade of trees. Farmers cared for animals and tended their fields. Fishermen cast nets into the river. Priests lit incense inside temples where prayers rose quietly toward the heavens. But uncertainty lingered like distant clouds. Ahotep belonged to a royal family determined to restore unity to the land. Though history often remembers kings and military victories, ancient records suggest that this queen herself possessed extraordinary strength and wisdom. Her husband, Seqenenretau, became one of the leaders who resisted foreign rule. Yet conflict brought danger, and eventually tragedy touched the royal household. After his death, responsibilities fell heavily upon the family. The future seemed uncertain. In the cool hours before sunrise, palace servants likely moved through quiet halls carrying lamps and preparing food. Advisors gathered with scrolls and reports. Messengers arrived after long journeys. Outside, the Nile continued its timeless journey northward, indifferent to human struggles. And within these walls, Queen Ahotep stood firm. She was not remembered merely for beauty or ceremony. Ancient inscriptions praised her courage and her ability to bring order during difficult times. They spoke of a woman who cared for Egypt and helped unite its people. In a world often shaped by warfare and uncertainty, her steady presence brought reassurance. Perhaps during long evenings, she sat beside pools where lotus flowers floated peacefully upon still water. Perhaps she listened carefully as trusted advisors discussed the challenges facing the kingdom. Oil lamps flickered softly against painted walls. Gentle breezes moved through open windows. Somewhere nearby, musicians played quiet melodies upon harps. Yet even within moments of calm, responsibilities remained. Her children would inherit a nation struggling to find stability once more. Among them was a young prince named Ahmose. He would eventually become one of Egypt's great rulers. But during his early years, the guidance and strength of his mother proved invaluable. History sometimes records events in only a few words. Names are written upon monuments. Victories are listed upon stone. Yet behind those brief records were countless ordinary days. Days filled with conversations, hopes, worries, and decisions. Queen Ahotep lived through such days. Morning sunlight shining across palace gardens. The scent of fresh bread carried through courtyards. Priests chanting prayers within sacred halls. Birds calling beside the Nile. Servants tending flowers and pools. Messengers arriving with news from distant cities. And always, beneath the bright Egyptian sky, the hope that peace would return. Slowly, over the years, that hope began to grow. Young Ahmose matured. Armies gathered strength. The dream of restoring Egypt became stronger with each passing season. And beside the future king stood the memory and influence of a queen whose courage had helped preserve the kingdom during uncertain times. As the stars appeared each night above the temples and the river reflected the moonlight in gentle waves, the story of Egypt quietly moved forward. And another remarkable woman was waiting beyond the horizon of time. Her name was Ahmose Nefertari. And her life would become deeply woven into the story of a reunited Egypt, where peace, prosperity, and quiet strength would once again flourish beneath the endless sky beside the Nile. As the years passed, the land of Egypt slowly began to breathe more peacefully again. The worries that had once shadowed the kingdom started to fade like mist disappearing beneath the morning sun. Villages along the Nile continued their familiar routines, and the steady rhythm of life returned little by little. The river itself seemed unchanged. Each dawn, fishermen pushed their wooden boats into the calm water. Farmers examined their fields with hopeful eyes. Women carried baskets filled with grain and fruit. Children followed goats and sheep through dusty paths, laughing beneath the bright sky. In the evenings, families gathered together, sharing simple meals while the colors of sunset slowly faded over the western desert. And during this time of renewal, a new queen rose beside the throne. Her name was Ahmose Nefertari. She would become one of the most respected women in Egyptian history. Born into the royal family, Ahmose Nefertari had known both uncertainty and hope from an early age. She grew up hearing stories of struggle and perseverance. She saw how courage and patience could guide a nation through difficult years. These lessons remained with her throughout her life. By her side stood her husband, Ahmose, the ruler who completed the work of restoring unity to Egypt. Together, they entered a new chapter. The sounds of war gradually gave way to the sounds of rebuilding. Stonecutters returned to their work. Craftsmen carved beautiful designs into temples. Merchants once again traveled safely across roads and rivers. Ships sailed south and north carrying goods from distant lands. Incense, ebony wood, ivory, copper, and precious stones found their way into Egyptian markets. Life became calmer. In cities like Thebes, mornings arrived with gentle beauty. Sunlight spread across temple walls painted with brilliant colors. Priests opened the doors of sacred shrines. The smell of incense drifted through quiet halls. Birds perched among sycamore trees, and lotus flowers slowly opened upon the surface of pools. Within the royal palace, servants prepared the day before the sun had fully risen. Fresh bread baked in ovens. Cool water filled elegant jars. Soft linen garments were carefully arranged. Perfumed oil scented the air. Musicians quietly tuned their instruments. And somewhere within these peaceful surroundings lived Queen Ahmose Nefertari. She was admired not only because she sat beside the king, but because she held important responsibilities herself. Ancient records show that she possessed great influence. She received titles of honor and held religious positions that gave her significant authority. People respected her deeply. Even long after her death, generations continued to honor her memory. That alone reveals how much she meant to the people of Egypt. Her days were likely filled with many duties. Royal estates required careful management. Priests and officials sought guidance. Ceremonies needed preparation. Temples required support. Gifts from foreign lands arrived regularly and had to be catalogued. Reports from governors and scribes demanded attention. Yet amid these responsibilities, there were surely moments of peace. Perhaps she walked through palace gardens in the early morning while the air remained cool and pleasant. Perhaps she paused beside pools covered with lotus blossoms. Perhaps she listened to birds singing among the palm trees. The palace itself was a place of beauty. Columns painted in bright colors supported shaded halls. Floors were decorated with images of flowers and water birds. Curtains moved gently in the breeze. Pools reflected the changing sky. Servants watered gardens filled with pomegranates, figs, and fragrant herbs. Life within the palace moved quietly and carefully. Meals were served upon fine dishes. Fresh fruit was arranged in baskets. Wine and beer were stored in cool rooms. Musicians played soft melodies during celebrations. And throughout the kingdom, ordinary people continued their own peaceful routines. Women spun thread into linen. Potters shaped clay jars with skilled hands. Carpenters crafted furniture from imported wood. Scribes practiced beautiful writing upon sheets of papyrus. Goldsmiths transformed precious metals into necklaces and rings. The sounds of daily life blended together into a gentle rhythm that had endured for generations. For the Egyptians, order and balance remained deeply important. The rising sun each morning reminded them of renewal. The yearly flooding of the Nile reminded them of abundance. The stars above reminded them of eternity. Everything possessed a place within the great pattern of existence. Queen Nefertari herself became closely connected to religion and tradition. One of her most important titles was connected to the worship of the gods. Through these sacred roles, she helped maintain spiritual harmony throughout the kingdom. Ceremonies inside temples unfolded with great care. Priests dressed in clean white linen. Incense filled the air. Sacred songs echoed softly through vast chambers. Oil lamps flickered against stone walls. Offerings of bread, fruit, flowers, and wine were placed before statues of the gods. These rituals brought comfort and reassurance to the people. For them, the world functioned best when harmony was preserved. And Nefertari became one of the guardians of that harmony. Years passed quietly. Children grew into adults. Harvests came and went. The Nile continued its eternal journey. And the queen's influence remained strong. Unlike many names that disappear into history, hers endured. Even centuries later, workers and craftsmen in certain communities honored her almost like a protective spirit. They painted images of her. They remembered her with affection and gratitude. This was a rare and remarkable honor. Many rulers were remembered. But few were loved. And somehow, through the passing generations, Nefertari earned both respect and affection. Perhaps it was because she represented stability. Perhaps it was because she lived during a time when Egypt found peace once again. Or perhaps her kindness and wisdom left impressions that survived far longer than stone monuments. No one can know every detail now. The voices of those ancient people have long since faded. The gardens have vanished. The perfumes have disappeared into memory. The music has grown silent. Yet traces remain. Carvings upon stone. Painted walls. Ancient writings. Small fragments carefully preserved across thousands of years. Through these fragments, the image of Nefertari still appears. Calm. Dignified. steady. A queen who stood beside a king, but whose own light shone quietly and beautifully. And while her memory endured, the story of Egypt itself continued to unfold. New rulers sat upon the throne. Temples became grander. Trade expanded. The kingdom prospered. Far to the south, the river flowed past cliffs and deserts. Far to the north, ships sailed toward distant shores. Generations were born beneath the same blue sky. And among those future generations, another royal child would one day grow up surrounded by beauty, ceremony, and expectation. She would become one of the most extraordinary women ever to wear the royal crown. Her name would echo across centuries. Travelers would speak of her. Historians would study her. Artists would paint her image. And thousands of years later, people throughout the world would still remember her. She was Hatshepsut. But before she became one of Egypt's most powerful rulers, she was simply a young princess walking through palace gardens beside the Nile, listening to the songs of birds and watching sunlight dance upon quiet pools, unaware of the remarkable destiny that waited patiently ahead. In the years that followed, Egypt entered a period of growing confidence and quiet prosperity. The troubles of earlier generations seemed more distant now, like memories softened by time. Across the land, temples rose toward the sky, fields stretched green beside the Nile, and the familiar rhythms of daily life continued beneath the warm Egyptian sun. The river remained the heart of everything. At dawn, mist sometimes hovered above the water before the sunlight slowly chased it away. White birds stood patiently among the reeds. Small boats drifted quietly along the current. The voices of fishermen carried softly across the water as nets were lowered into the river. Life moved gently. And within the royal family, a young girl named Hatshepsut was growing up. She was born into a world filled with ceremony and tradition. Her father, Thutmose, ruled Egypt during a time of strength. The kingdom extended far beyond the fertile banks of the Nile, and wealth from many lands flowed into Egypt. From an early age, Hatshepsut lived among beautiful surroundings. Palace walls were painted with bright scenes of nature. Pools filled with lotus flowers reflected the sky. Palm trees swayed in the breeze. Servants moved quietly through shaded halls carrying woven baskets, jars of cool water, and fresh fruits gathered from royal gardens. Life inside the palace followed careful routines. Before sunrise, servants prepared for the day. Bread baked slowly in clay ovens. Linen garments were folded neatly. Perfumed oil scented the rooms. Musicians practiced soft melodies upon harps and flutes. The royal household awakened gradually. As the first light spread across the horizon, birds began their morning songs. Priests offered prayers in nearby temples. Officials gathered with records and reports. Scribes sharpened their reeds and prepared ink for another day of writing. Young Hatshepsut observed all of this. She listened. She learned. She watched. Royal children in Egypt received careful instruction. Tutors taught them reading and writing. Priests explained sacred traditions. Officials shared knowledge about the kingdom. Stories of past rulers and ancient customs were passed from one generation to the next. Perhaps in quiet moments, Hatshepsut walked beside garden pools where colorful fish swam beneath the surface. Perhaps she sat beneath the shade of sycamore trees while cool breezes moved through the leaves. Perhaps she listened to the songs of servants grinding grain or weaving linen. Though surrounded by luxury, she lived within a world shaped by responsibility. Every member of the royal family held an important place. And Hatshepsut proved to be intelligent and observant. Years passed quietly. The Nile flooded and receded. Harvests filled granaries. Temples welcomed worshippers. Festivals brought joy to cities and villages. People gathered beneath colorful banners while musicians played and dancers moved gracefully. Food and drink were shared among families and friends. Incense filled the air. Flowers decorated homes and shrines. Life possessed a peaceful rhythm. Eventually, Hatshepsut married her half-brother, Thutmose II, according to royal tradition. Together they entered adulthood and took on new responsibilities. As queen, Hatshepsut appeared beside the king during ceremonies and religious festivals. She wore fine linen garments and elaborate jewelry crafted by skilled artisans. Gold bracelets reflected sunlight. Necklaces of turquoise and precious stones rested upon her shoulders. But beneath the beauty and elegance, she possessed something even more valuable. She possessed confidence. She possessed patience. And she possessed an understanding of leadership. These qualities would become increasingly important. For after several years, Thutmose II died. His death left uncertainty within the royal family. A young boy named Thutmose III became the new king. But he was still a child. And so Hatshepsut stepped forward. At first, she ruled as regent, guiding the kingdom while the young king grew older. No one could have guessed just how extraordinary her future would become. Each morning, while sunlight illuminated temple walls and birds flew above the Nile, Hatshepsut attended to matters of government. Officials brought reports. Messengers delivered news. Scribes recorded decisions. Governors sought instructions. Priests organized ceremonies. Trade routes required protection. Storehouses required management. The kingdom depended upon order. And Hatshepsut provided that order. Slowly, over time, something remarkable happened. She assumed greater authority. Eventually, she took upon herself the full title of pharaoh. This was unusual. Egypt had known queens before, and women had held influence. But Hatshepsut embraced the position traditionally occupied by kings. It was a bold decision. Yet she approached it not with noise or force, but with calm determination. Ancient statues show her wearing symbols associated with the pharaohs. In some images, artists even portrayed her with the ceremonial beard traditionally worn by kings. To modern eyes, these images may seem unusual. But to the Egyptians, symbols carried deep meaning. What mattered most was stability. What mattered most was harmony. And under Hatshepsut, Egypt flourished. Peace brought prosperity. Trade expanded. Craftsmanship thrived. Temples grew larger and more beautiful. People continued their daily routines with confidence. Farmers tended their crops. Merchants sold goods in busy markets. Children played beside the river. Women baked bread and cared for their homes. Scribes copied texts upon papyrus. Stonecutters shaped enormous blocks with patient skill. The kingdom prospered beneath the steady hand of a remarkable queen. One of Hatshepsut's greatest achievements involved trade rather than war. She organized an expedition to the mysterious land of Punt. To the Egyptians, Punt was a place associated with wonder and abundance. Ships prepared carefully for the journey. Wooden vessels were loaded with supplies. Sailors checked ropes and sails. Officials recorded inventories. Priests offered prayers for safe travels. When the expedition returned, it brought treasures from distant lands. Incense trees. Ivory. Gold. Exotic animals. Rare woods. Perfumes and precious goods. The arrival of these treasures filled Egypt with excitement, though life itself remained peaceful and orderly. Hatshepsut celebrated these accomplishments by constructing magnificent monuments. Among them stood one of the most beautiful structures ever built in ancient Egypt. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. Nestled beneath towering cliffs on the western bank of the Nile, the temple rose gracefully in terraces connected by ramps. Columns stretched in elegant rows. Courtyards welcomed sunlight. Gardens once bloomed with trees and flowers. Incense drifted through sacred spaces. Visitors approaching the temple must have felt awe mixed with serenity. Even today, thousands of years later, the structure retains a quiet beauty. In the cool hours of morning, shadows move slowly across its stone surfaces. Birds fly above the cliffs. The desert wind whispers softly. And one can almost imagine the footsteps of priests and officials walking through its halls long ago. Hatshepsut's reign lasted many peaceful years. Unlike rulers remembered for battles and conquest, she became known for stability, prosperity, and construction. Her kingdom was filled with activity, but not chaos. There was order. There was abundance. There was harmony. And perhaps, in quiet moments far from the responsibilities of the throne, Hatshepsut herself found peace within palace gardens or temple courtyards. Perhaps she listened to the gentle sound of fountains. Perhaps she watched lotus flowers opening beneath the morning sun. Perhaps she stood upon balconies overlooking the Nile and saw the countless boats moving peacefully along the river. No one can know such moments with certainty. Time has hidden many details. Yet her achievements remain. Stone remembers. Temples remember. Ancient inscriptions remember. And so, across the centuries, the name Hatshepsut continues to endure. The seasons came and went. Years turned into decades. New generations were born beneath Egypt's endless blue sky. And eventually, another woman would rise whose wisdom and influence would quietly shape the lives of kings themselves. She would become one of the most respected queens of the new kingdom. Her name was Tai. And her story would begin in a world of great wealth, grand palaces, and peaceful evenings beside the timeless waters of the Nile. The years continued to pass with the gentle certainty of the Nile itself. Seasons arrived and departed. Fields turned green after the flooding and golden at harvest time. Villages hummed with familiar routines. The voices of merchants, farmers, craftsmen, and priests blended together into the soft music of everyday life. Ancient Egypt had known times of hardship and times of peace. Now, during the height of the new kingdom, prosperity spread across much of the land. Temples stood proudly above cities. Storehouses overflowed with grain. Ships traveled to distant lands. Gold from Nubia and precious goods from foreign kingdoms entered Egypt through carefully organized trade. And within this flourishing world, another remarkable woman quietly stepped into history. Her name was Tai. Unlike many queens before her, Tai was not born into the royal family. Her father, Yuya, and her mother, Thea, were respected and influential people, but they were not kings or queens. Yet destiny often moves in quiet and unexpected ways. As a young woman, Tai married Amenhotep III. Together, they would oversee one of the most prosperous periods Egypt had ever known. Their reign unfolded during years of peace, beauty, and extraordinary wealth. The royal court itself reflected this prosperity. Palaces grew larger and more magnificent. Their walls were painted with scenes of flowers, birds, and flowing water. Gardens stretched beneath the warm sky, filled with sycamore trees, palms, and pools covered with lotus blossoms. Servants carefully tended the grounds. Water birds wandered near shaded ponds. Fragrant herbs scented the air. Gentle breezes moved through open courtyards. Life within the palace followed graceful rhythms. Before sunrise, cooks prepared bread and fruit for the morning meal. Fresh linen garments were arranged. Perfumed oils and cosmetics sat upon beautifully carved tables. Musicians practiced melodies upon harps and lutes. Scribes prepared documents and reports. As the first light of day entered the palace, another busy day began. Queen Tai occupied an honored place beside her husband. Ancient images reveal something unusual. In many carvings and statues, Tai appears almost equal in size to the king himself. This was no accident. Artists followed traditions carefully. The size of figures often reflected importance. And through these images, it becomes clear that Queen Tai held extraordinary influence. She was respected. She was trusted. And her opinions mattered. Foreign rulers from distant lands even addressed letters directly to her. Messengers crossed deserts and seas carrying carefully written messages. Some came from kings far beyond Egypt's borders. These rulers recognized her importance. They knew her voice carried weight. In quiet rooms illuminated by oil lamps, scribes likely read such messages aloud. Officials discussed matters of trade and diplomacy. The king listened. And beside him sat Queen Tai. Wise. Calm. Attentive. The world around them seemed peaceful. Egyptian ships traveled across the waters. Markets bustled with activity. Craftsmen created beautiful jewelry and furniture. Goldsmiths shaped precious metals into delicate works of art. Weavers produced fine linen softer than many fabrics known elsewhere. Perfume makers blended oils and fragrant plants. Throughout the kingdom, life moved steadily. Farmers rose before dawn. Oxen pulled wooden plows through fertile fields. Women ground grain into flour. Children learned skills from their parents. Fishermen cast nets into the Nile. Potters shaped clay beneath their steady hands. Everyday life remained connected to the ancient rhythms that had guided Egypt for generations. Meanwhile, the royal family expanded. Among Tai's children was a young prince who would one day become one of the most mysterious rulers in Egyptian history. His name was Amenhotep IV. Though the world would later know him by another name, Akhenaten. As a mother, Tai likely guided her children with patience and wisdom. Royal education required great care. Princes and princesses learned reading, writing, religion, and statecraft. They listened to stories of their ancestors. They studied traditions passed down across centuries. And all around them, the beauty of Egypt surrounded their daily lives. Evenings within the palace must have been peaceful. As the heat of the day faded, cooler air entered through open windows. Servants lit oil lamps. Musicians played quiet songs. Families gathered together. The fragrance of incense drifted through halls painted with scenes of nature. Above everything, the stars appeared one by one across the darkening sky. Ancient Egyptians loved the night sky. They observed the stars carefully. They believed the heavens reflected divine order. Looking upward on clear evenings, they found comfort in the endless beauty above. Perhaps Queen Tai herself spent quiet moments beneath those same stars. Perhaps she walked through gardens illuminated by moonlight. Perhaps she listened to the gentle sounds of fountains and distant music. Though surrounded by luxury, she also carried heavy responsibilities. The stability of the kingdom depended upon wise decisions. And she remained a trusted presence beside the king throughout many years. Amenhotep III became known for his building projects. Temples expanded. Monuments multiplied. Statues rose from the earth. Artists reached remarkable heights of skill. Under his rule, Egypt enjoyed one of its brightest periods. And Queen Tai stood beside him through it all. Years passed slowly. Their children grew older. The Nile continued its eternal journey northward. The king himself aged. And eventually, after many prosperous years, Amenhotep III left this world. His son inherited the throne. At first, the kingdom expected continuity. But unexpected changes soon began to appear. The young king, Amenhotep IV, gradually embraced new religious ideas. Eventually, he changed his name to Akhenaten. Ancient traditions that had endured for centuries were transformed. New temples appeared. Old practices were challenged. Even the royal capital itself moved to a newly built city. For many Egyptians, these changes must have seemed confusing. Generations had followed familiar customs. Priests had performed the same rituals for hundreds of years. Families had worshipped according to ancient traditions. Now, the world around them was changing. Through these uncertain times, Queen Tai remained an important figure. Her wisdom and experience were invaluable. Though growing older, she still commanded great respect. Foreign rulers continued to recognize her significance. Officials continued to honor her. And within the royal family, her presence provided stability. Ancient records suggest that she maintained influence even during her son's reign. This reveals something remarkable. Her authority was not simply borrowed from her husband. It belonged to her. It had been earned through years of wisdom, patience, and leadership. Such respect cannot be created overnight. It grows slowly. Like trees beside the Nile. Like reeds along the riverbanks. Like trust between people who have lived and worked together for many years. Eventually, Queen Tai's long life came to an end. But her memory endured. Generations remembered her. Archaeologists thousands of years later would uncover traces of her existence. Her image. Her name. Even strands of her hair preserved across the centuries. These discoveries remind us that behind the grand monuments and ancient inscriptions lived real people. People who laughed and worried. People who loved their families. People who walked through gardens, watched sunsets, and listened to birds singing beside the Nile. And among those people, Queen Tai stood as one of the most remarkable women Egypt had ever known. Yet history itself was continuing to unfold. For during the strange and fascinating years of Akhenaten's reign, another queen would appear. Her beauty would become famous. Her face would one day be recognized throughout the world. But her true strength reached far beyond appearance. She lived during one of the most mysterious chapters in Egyptian history. And even now, thousands of years later, many questions still surround her life. Her name was Nefertiti. And beneath the golden sunlight of ancient Egypt, her story was only beginning. The sun continued to rise over Egypt as it always had. Morning light touched the temples. Birds called from the reeds beside the Nile. Farmers stepped into their fields while fishermen prepared their nets. Bakers tended warm ovens, and scribes unrolled sheets of papyrus to begin another day of careful writing. Life moved with familiar rhythms. And yet, during the years that followed, Egypt entered one of the most unusual chapters in its long history. At the center of this changing world stood a queen whose image would survive across thousands of years. Her name was Nefertiti. Even now, after so much time has passed, her face remains one of the most recognizable from the ancient world. But in her own lifetime, she was known for far more than beauty. She stood beside a king during a period of enormous change. And through those years, she occupied a place of extraordinary importance. The exact details of Nefertiti's early life remain hidden behind the mists of time. Many questions still have no certain answers. But what is known suggests that she entered the royal family as the wife of Amenhotep IV, the son of Queen Tai. In time, the young king changed his name to Akhenaten. And with that change came others. For centuries, Egyptians had worshipped many gods and goddesses. Temples across the land honored ancient traditions passed down through generations. Priests cared for sacred rituals. Families offered prayers. Festivals filled cities with music and celebration. But Akhenaten embraced a different path. He focused his devotion upon Aten, represented by the radiant disk of the sun. Gradually, old customs gave way to new ones. And beside him stood Nefertiti. Ancient carvings reveal something remarkable. Again and again, the queen appears not as a distant figure hidden behind the king, but as an active and powerful presence. Artists showed her participating in ceremonies. They depicted her making offerings. They portrayed her with dignity and authority. Sometimes, she appears almost equal to the king himself. This was unusual. And it suggests that Nefertiti possessed influence that reached far beyond ceremonial duties. Eventually, the royal family moved to a newly built city. Today, historians call it Amarna. In its time, it was a place unlike any other. Built in the desert between cliffs and the Nile, the city rose beneath open skies and brilliant sunlight. Broad roads stretched through the settlement. Palaces gleamed with fresh paint. Gardens and pools softened the landscape. Temples stood open to the sky, allowing sunlight to pour directly into sacred spaces. The city must have felt new and alive. Workers shaped stone blocks. Artists painted colorful scenes. Builders raised walls and columns. Servants carried supplies through busy streets. Boats traveled along the Nile bringing food and materials. And everywhere, the bright Egyptian sun illuminated the growing city. Within the royal palace, life unfolded with elegance and routine. Painted floors showed scenes of birds flying above marshes. Walls displayed flowers and plants. Pools reflected the blue sky overhead. Lotus blossoms floated peacefully upon the water. Servants moved quietly through shaded rooms carrying woven baskets, jars of cool water, and fresh fruit. The royal family itself appeared unusually affectionate in artwork. Ancient scenes show Akhenaten and Nefertiti with their daughters. They sit together beneath the rays of Aten. They embrace their children. They share moments of tenderness. Such scenes feel surprisingly warm and human. Though created thousands of years ago, they reveal a family living ordinary moments amid extraordinary circumstances. Nefertiti herself became famous for her grace and elegance. Her distinctive crown rose high above her head. Her garments were made from fine linen. Jewelry crafted from gold and precious stones adorned her neck and arms. But these outward signs of beauty represented only a small part of her life. Behind the scenes, responsibilities remained constant. Messages arrived from foreign lands. Officials sought guidance. Religious ceremonies required attention. The growing city demanded organization. And throughout these years, Nefertiti remained a central figure. Meanwhile, ordinary Egyptians continued their daily lives. Women baked bread and brewed beer. Children chased one another through village streets. Potters shaped clay jars. Farmers cared for wheat and barley. Fishermen cast nets into the river. Shepherds guided animals across the countryside. Though rulers and traditions changed, the rhythms of ordinary life endured. Morning followed night. Summer followed spring. The Nile flooded and receded. The stars appeared each evening. The moon crossed the heavens. And life continued. Perhaps in the cool hours after sunset, Queen Nefertiti walked through palace gardens. Perhaps she listened to the sound of fountains. Perhaps she watched her daughters playing beneath the evening sky. Perhaps musicians performed soft melodies while oil lamps flickered gently. No one can know these moments for certain. Yet such quiet moments surely existed. For even queens lived ordinary hours between ceremonies and responsibilities. They watched sunsets. They spoke with family. They worried. They hoped. They rested. And they dreamed. As years passed, however, mysteries began to surround the royal family. Some daughters disappeared from the records. Deaths occurred. The kingdom itself faced challenges. And then, almost suddenly, the name Nefertiti became strangely silent. Historians still debate what happened. Some believe she died. Others think she continued to rule under another name. Some suggest she may have briefly served as pharaoh herself. The truth remains uncertain. Ancient history does not always preserve clear answers. Time has hidden many secrets beneath sand and silence. Yet despite these mysteries, one thing remains certain. Nefertiti's memory endured. And centuries later, an extraordinary discovery would bring her image back into the world. In 1912, archaeologists uncovered a painted bust of the Queen. The sculpture amazed everyone who saw it. Its delicate features. Its elegant crown. Its calm expression. Its remarkable beauty. Across thousands of years, the face of Nefertiti seemed to emerge from the past with quiet dignity. But beauty alone does not explain why people continue to remember her. It is because she lived during one of Egypt's most fascinating periods. It is because she stood beside a king during years of dramatic change. It is because her presence appears again and again throughout ancient art. And perhaps it is because mystery itself possesses a gentle power. Questions that remain unanswered often linger in the imagination. The city of Amarna eventually declined. Old traditions returned. Future generations restored many ancient practices. The desert wind slowly covered abandoned buildings with sand. Birds nested among broken walls. Silence settled over the once busy streets. Yet memories remained. Fragments of paintings. Pieces of inscriptions. Statues buried beneath the earth. And through these fragments, the image of Nefertiti survived. Calm. Elegant. Strong. Timeless. The years moved onward. New kings came to the throne. The great river continued its endless journey. Children were born. Families gathered for evening meals. Temples welcomed worshippers once again. And eventually, another queen would appear whose name would become forever associated with devotion, beauty, and love. Her husband would become one of Egypt's most celebrated rulers. Together, their images would be carved upon temples and monuments destined to survive for thousands of years. Her name was Nefertari. And beneath the soft light of the Egyptian sun, her remarkable story was quietly beginning. The centuries flowed onward with the same quiet patience that had always guided the Nile. The river did not hurry. It never seemed troubled by the rise and fall of kings or the passing of generations. Its waters moved steadily northward, nourishing fields, villages, and cities just as they had for thousands of years. Morning sunlight still spread across the fertile banks. Farmers still guided oxen through rich soil. Women still baked bread in warm clay ovens. Children still laughed beneath the shade of date palms. And as evening arrived, families gathered beneath the stars while gentle breezes brought relief from the heat of the day. Life continued. And eventually, Egypt entered another period of strength and grandeur. New temples rose from the earth. New rulers inherited the throne. And among them was a king whose name would echo through history for countless generations. He was Ramesses II. Later ages would remember him as Ramesses the Great. And beside this powerful ruler stood a queen whose memory would remain wrapped in grace and devotion. Her name was Nefertari. The exact details of her childhood have long disappeared into the distant past. Time has hidden many things, and ancient records do not always preserve every story. But what remains clear is this. Nefertari held a special place in the heart of Ramesses II. Among his many wives, she was deeply cherished. Ancient inscriptions themselves reveal this affection. Her name appeared beside his upon monuments. Her image stood alongside his own. And throughout Egypt, signs of her importance could be seen. As queen, Nefertari lived within magnificent surroundings. Royal palaces offered beauty and comfort. Painted walls showed flowers, birds, and scenes from nature. Pools filled with lotus blossoms reflected the changing sky. Gardens offered cool shade beneath palm and sycamore trees. Servants carefully tended every detail. Fresh flowers decorated rooms. Perfumed oils scented the air. Musicians played gentle melodies. And through open windows came the sounds of birds and flowing water. Yet life as queen involved much more than beauty. Ceremonies filled the calendar. Religious festivals required preparation. Officials sought guidance. Royal households demanded organization. Messages arrived from distant provinces. Foreign visitors appeared bearing gifts and greetings. And through it all, Nefertari fulfilled her role with dignity. Ancient artwork portrays her with elegance and confidence. Her garments were woven from fine linen. Gold bracelets adorned her wrists. Colorful stones and precious jewels decorated her necklaces. But beyond these outward symbols stood something more lasting. Respect, affection, and influence. Ramesses II himself expressed his feelings through words carved into stone. One inscription described Nefertari as the one for whom the sun shines. Such words reveal not merely political importance but genuine admiration. Perhaps during quiet evenings, after the duties of the day had ended, the royal couple sat within peaceful gardens illuminated by oil lamps. Perhaps musicians played softly nearby. Perhaps the fragrance of incense drifted through the air. Perhaps they spoke quietly while stars appeared overhead. Such moments belong to imagination, yet they remind us that behind the monuments and titles were human beings living ordinary hours within extraordinary lives. Throughout the kingdom, daily life unfolded with familiar rhythms. The great markets bustled with activity. Merchants displayed baskets of dates, figs, onions, and fresh vegetables. Potters arranged newly fired jars. Weavers sold fine linen. Goldsmiths displayed beautiful jewelry. Children followed their parents through busy streets. The sounds of bargaining and conversation filled the air. Near the riverbanks, fishermen returned with their catches. Farmers prepared fields for planting. Women ground grain into flour. Bread baked slowly over warm fires. Goats wandered through village paths. And as darkness approached, families gathered together beneath the cool evening sky. Life remained simple in many ways. And life remained beautiful. Ramesses II devoted much of his reign to construction. Across Egypt, monuments rose toward the heavens. Temples expanded. Statues towered above visitors. Stonecutters and craftsmen worked with extraordinary skill. Their tools struck limestone and sandstone day after day. Patient hands transformed blocks of stone into lasting works of art. Among these achievements stood one of the most beautiful monuments dedicated to a queen. Near Abu Simbel, in southern Egypt, Ramesses ordered the construction of a temple honoring Nefertari. This alone reveals how deeply she was valued. The temple stood beside his own great temple. Its facade featured enormous statues. And unlike many monuments, where queens appeared much smaller than kings, Nefertari's statues stood nearly equal in height to those of Ramesses himself. This was remarkable. Visitors approaching the temple must have been filled with awe. Sunlight illuminated the carved figures. The desert stretched endlessly around them. The blue sky above seemed vast and peaceful. And within the temple walls, painted scenes glowed with color. Even after thousands of years, traces of those colors still survive. Reds, blues, golds, soft yellows. They speak quietly across the centuries. And they tell of a queen who occupied a place of extraordinary honor. Nefertari herself was associated with the goddess Hathor, beloved throughout Egypt. Hathor represented love, beauty, joy, music, and motherhood. Festivals honoring her brought happiness to the people. Musicians played harps and tambourines. Dancers moved gracefully. Families shared food and drink. Flowers decorated homes and temples. The atmosphere was filled with celebration and gratitude. Perhaps Nefertari herself participated in such festivals. Perhaps she listened to the music. Perhaps she watched dancers perform beneath the bright Egyptian sun. Perhaps she found moments of peace amid the responsibilities of royal life. The years passed gently. Children grew older. Harvests filled granaries. Trade routes brought prosperity. Temples welcomed worshippers. And the Nile flowed onward beneath changing skies. Yet time touches everyone. Even kings. Even queens. Eventually, Nefertari's earthly journey came to an end. Her death brought sorrow to those who loved her. And preparations began for her burial. Deep within the Valley of the Queens, artisans created a resting place worthy of her memory. Her tomb became one of the most beautiful ever discovered. Its walls were covered with brilliant paintings. Stars decorated ceilings. Gods and goddesses appeared in vivid colors. Scenes of eternal life unfolded across every surface. Walking through those chambers today, one almost feels the presence of quiet devotion. The artists who painted those walls worked with extraordinary care. Their brushes moved patiently. Their colors glowed brightly. Their purpose was clear: to honor a beloved queen. Centuries passed. Empires rose and vanished. The desert winds continued their endless journey. And still, hidden beneath the earth, the tomb waited silently. Until modern times brought new discoveries. When archaeologists entered those chambers, they found beauty that seemed almost untouched by time. Visitors who see those paintings often speak softly. For there is something peaceful within those ancient walls. Something gentle. Something timeless. And through those colors and images, the memory of Nefertari continues to live. Not only as a queen. Not only as the wife of a great king. But as a woman remembered with affection and honor. The stars still rise above Egypt. The moon still shines upon the Nile. And somewhere beyond the silence of centuries, her name continues to endure. Yet the story of powerful Egyptian queens was far from over. For the kingdom itself would eventually face uncertainty once again. Dynasties would weaken. Old certainties would begin to fade. And in those changing times, another woman would step forward to claim authority for herself. Her path would not be easy. She would rule during years filled with challenge and transition. Her name was Taworit. And as the evening winds whispered across the temples and the waters of the Nile reflected the stars above, her story quietly waited to unfold. The passing of time rarely announces itself. One season quietly gives way to another. Children become adults. Familiar faces grow older. Buildings that once seemed new slowly weather beneath the sun and wind. And just as the Nile flows steadily onward, history itself moves with a gentle and endless rhythm. For many years, Egypt had enjoyed periods of greatness and prosperity. Magnificent temples had been raised. Monuments stood proudly beneath clear blue skies. The names of mighty kings echoed through the land. But even the strongest kingdoms experience change. As generations passed, uncertainty slowly returned. The final years of the 19th dynasty brought challenges that could be felt throughout the kingdom. Some rulers sat upon the throne for only short periods. Questions of succession became increasingly complicated. Officials sought stability. Priests maintained ancient traditions. Ordinary people continued their daily routines, hoping for peace and order beneath the familiar Egyptian sun. And during this time, another remarkable queen emerged. Her name was Taworit. Today, she is not as widely remembered as Hatshepsut or Nefertiti, yet her story carries its own quiet strength. She lived during a period when Egypt itself stood at a crossroads. Ancient traditions still guided daily life. The Nile still nourished the fields. Farmers still rose before dawn. Women baked bread and brewed beer. Children played beneath the shade of palm trees. Yet behind these peaceful scenes, the kingdom faced growing uncertainty. Taworit entered royal life as the wife of Seti II. As queen, she occupied a position of honor and responsibility. Ceremonies, religious duties, and palace affairs filled her days. The royal court itself remained a place of elegance and careful order. Servants moved quietly through painted halls. Musicians played soft melodies. Pools reflected the sky. Lotus flowers floated peacefully upon calm waters. Perfume scented the air. And beyond the palace walls, Egypt continued its timeless routines. At sunrise, birds gathered along the riverbanks. Fishermen pushed their boats into the Nile. Craftsmen opened their workshops. Scribes unrolled fresh sheets of papyrus. Merchants arranged goods in busy marketplaces. Life moved forward with familiar certainty. But after the death of Seti II, the future became less clear. A young ruler named Siptah inherited the throne. Because he was still young, Taworit occupied an important position within the government. Like queens before her, she provided stability during uncertain years. Ancient records suggest that she exercised considerable authority. Officials respected her. Her name appeared prominently upon monuments. And as time passed, her influence continued to grow. Eventually, after the death of Siptah, Taworit assumed full royal authority. She became pharaoh. In doing so, she followed a path once walked by Hatshepsut centuries earlier. This was no ordinary achievement. To rule Egypt required wisdom, confidence, and determination. The responsibilities were immense. Reports arrived daily. Governors required instructions. Temple affairs demanded attention. Trade routes had to remain secure. Storehouses needed careful management. And throughout the kingdom, the people depended upon order. Perhaps in the early mornings, before the heat of the day became intense, Taworit listened to advisors while sunlight entered palace windows. Perhaps she walked through gardens where fountains cooled the air. Perhaps she paused beside pools covered with lotus blossoms. Perhaps she found moments of peace amid the burdens of leadership. No one can know such moments with certainty. Time preserves names and monuments, but often hides the quieter details. Still, those details surely existed. For even rulers experienced ordinary hours. They watched sunsets. They listened to music. They shared meals. They spoke with family and trusted companions. They rested beneath the stars. And they carried hopes and worries within their hearts. Taweret ruled during difficult years. The kingdom itself faced challenges that extended beyond the palace. Political tensions increased. Old structures weakened. Changes that had been building slowly beneath the surface became harder to ignore. The stability that earlier generations had enjoyed no longer seemed certain. And yet, amid these uncertainties, daily life continued. In villages beside the Nile, women prepared bread each morning. Children fetched water. Farmers harvested grain. Goat herds guided animals across dusty paths. Potters shaped clay into useful vessels. The sounds of ordinary life remained comforting and familiar. At night, oil lamps glowed softly within homes. Families gathered together. Stories were shared. The stars stretched endlessly overhead. And somewhere within the royal palace, Queen Taweret carried the heavy responsibilities of leadership. She ordered building projects and completed monuments begun by others. Her name appeared upon inscriptions. Her image was carved into stone. These acts reflected her authority and her desire to leave something lasting behind. But history can sometimes be unkind. The years following her reign brought further changes. New rulers emerged. Political struggles unfolded. And over time, many traces of Taweret's accomplishments faded beneath the sands of history. Monuments were altered. Names disappeared. Memories grew faint. Yet complete silence never arrived. Fragments survived. Ancient inscriptions. Pieces of monuments. Scattered clues waiting patiently beneath the earth. Thousands of years later, archaeologists and historians would carefully study these fragments. Slowly, they reconstructed the outline of her life. And once again, the name Taweret emerged from the shadows of the past. Not as a forgotten figure, but as a woman who had ruled Egypt during one of its most uncertain periods. A queen who became pharaoh. A leader who sought stability when the kingdom needed it most. The great temples she knew still stood beneath the sun. The Nile still flowed. The desert winds still whispered across ancient stones. And the stars she once gazed upon still shone above Egypt each night. Time had changed many things. Dynasties ended. New ages began. Foreign powers arrived. Centuries turned into millennia. And gradually, the world of the great pharaohs itself transformed. The ancient kingdom that had endured for thousands of years entered new chapters. Greek influences spread across Egypt. New languages could be heard in cities and markets. Fresh ideas arrived from distant lands. And eventually, a dynasty descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals came to rule the country. Within this new and changing Egypt, another queen would rise. Her name would become famous far beyond the banks of the Nile. Poets would write about her. Artists would paint her. Historians would debate her life. Legends would surround her. Yet beneath those legends stood a woman of remarkable intelligence and determination. She would become the last great ruler of ancient Egypt. Her name was Cleopatra. And as moonlight shimmered upon the quiet waters of the Nile and cool evening breezes moved through the reeds, the story of Egypt's most famous queen was only beginning. Long before her name became known throughout the world, before poets and historians wrote about her, and before legends wrapped themselves around her memory, Cleopatra was simply a young princess growing up in a palace beside the Nile. By the time she was born, Egypt had changed greatly from the days of Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, and Ramesses. Thousands of years had passed. New rulers had come from distant lands. The descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals now sat upon the throne. These rulers were known as the Ptolemies. They governed Egypt while preserving many traditions of the ancient land. Temples still welcomed worshippers. Priests still performed ceremonies. Farmers still depended upon the yearly flooding of the Nile. And the stars still rose above the desert just as they had for countless generations. Yet Egypt had become a meeting place of cultures. In the great city of Alexandria, one could hear different languages spoken in the streets. Ships arrived from faraway lands. Merchants carried spices, wine, glassware, papyrus, and precious goods through busy markets. Scholars gathered to discuss ideas. Poets composed verses. And travelers from across the Mediterranean came to marvel at the beauty and wealth of Egypt. It was within this fascinating world that Cleopatra was born. She entered a royal family filled with both luxury and uncertainty. Palaces offered comfort and elegance. Gardens bloomed with flowers. Fountains cooled the air. Servants attended to daily needs. Musicians performed during banquets. Fine fabrics and perfumes surrounded the royal household. Yet beneath these beautiful surroundings, danger often lingered. Politics within the royal family could be complicated. Power was precious. And many people desired it. From an early age, Cleopatra proved to be intelligent and curious. Unlike some rulers before her, she developed a deep interest in learning. Ancient writers later described her as highly educated. She studied languages. She listened to philosophers. She learned about mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. And perhaps most remarkably, she learned to speak Egyptian. Many rulers of the Ptolemaic dynasty had not done so. But Cleopatra wished to connect more closely with the people she ruled. This choice revealed something important about her character. She understood the value of communication. She understood the importance of understanding others. And she possessed a mind that never stopped learning. Meanwhile, life throughout Egypt continued with its familiar rhythms. The Nile remained eternal. Fishermen cast their nets at sunrise. Farmers cared for wheat and barley. Women baked bread and prepared meals. Children ran through village streets. Potters shaped clay vessels beneath skilled hands. The ordinary lives of countless people unfolded day after day beneath the warm Egyptian sun. In Alexandria itself, life possessed a different atmosphere. The city stood beside the sea rather than the desert. Wide streets bustled with activity. Markets overflowed with goods from distant lands. Ships crowded the harbor. Libraries and schools attracted scholars and thinkers. Towering above the harbor stood the famous lighthouse of Alexandria. Its great light guided sailors safely through the darkness. At night, its glow could be seen from far across the water. Travelers arriving by ship must have felt wonder as they approached the city. The scent of salt air mixed with spices and incense. The cries of seabirds echoed overhead. Waves lapped gently against wooden docks. Merchants unloaded cargo while sailors prepared for new journeys. And somewhere within the royal palace, the young Cleopatra studied and observed the world around her. Perhaps she walked through gardens overlooking the sea. Perhaps she listened to teachers explaining distant lands. Perhaps she watched ships arriving from places she could only imagine. Perhaps she spent quiet evenings reading scrolls while oil lamps flickered softly. Her world was one of knowledge, beauty, and growing responsibility. As the years passed, those responsibilities became increasingly real. Her father, Ptolemy XII, ruled Egypt during difficult times. The growing power of Rome cast a long shadow across the Mediterranean. Roman leaders possessed enormous influence. Their decisions affected kingdoms far beyond Italy. Egypt itself depended upon maintaining careful relationships with these powerful neighbors. Young Cleopatra undoubtedly understood this. She watched. She listened. She learned. And slowly, she prepared for the future. Eventually, her father died. According to tradition, Cleopatra was expected to rule alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. But peace within the royal family proved difficult. Disagreements emerged. Supporters gathered around different leaders. Political tensions grew. And before long, Cleopatra found herself separated from power. For many people, such setbacks would have meant defeat. But Cleopatra possessed remarkable determination. She refused to disappear quietly. While others may have expected her to accept defeat, she patiently searched for opportunities. Beyond Egypt, events within Rome itself were unfolding. One of the most powerful men in the world, Julius Caesar, had arrived in Alexandria. His name inspired both admiration and fear. He was a brilliant military commander and an influential leader. And soon, his path and Cleopatra's path would cross. Their meeting would change history. Stories about that meeting have survived for centuries. Some details may have grown into legend. Yet what remains clear is that Cleopatra impressed Caesar. Not merely with beauty. Not merely with charm. But with intelligence. With confidence. With determination. She possessed the ability to speak clearly and think quickly. She understood politics. She understood people. And she understood the importance of timing. Together, Cleopatra and Caesar navigated a period of conflict and uncertainty. Eventually, Cleopatra secured her position upon the throne. Peace gradually returned. And once again, Egypt continued its steady rhythms. Boats moved along the Nile. Markets filled with voices. Temples welcomed worshippers. Families gathered beneath evening skies. Life endured. And amid this ancient and beautiful land, Cleopatra had become queen. Still young, yet already tested by hardship. Still graceful, yet possessing remarkable strength. The years ahead would bring triumphs and sorrows. Love and loss. Hope and danger. And through it all, Cleopatra would prove herself to be one of the most extraordinary women ever to rule beside the timeless waters of the Nile. As evening settled gently over Alexandria and moonlight shimmered upon the sea, the story of Egypt's last great queen was only beginning to unfold. The evenings in Alexandria often arrived with a quiet beauty. As the heat of the day slowly faded, cool breezes drifted inland from the Mediterranean Sea. The cries of seabirds became softer. Lamps were lit inside homes and palaces. Merchants packed away their goods. Sailors secured their ships. Families gathered together to share meals and stories beneath the gentle light of oil lamps. Above the city, stars appeared one by one. And within the royal palace, Cleopatra's life had entered a new chapter. The years of uncertainty surrounding her struggle for the throne had slowly given way to stability. Though challenges remained, she had secured her position and begun the long work of governing Egypt. Her responsibilities were immense. Reports arrived from every corner of the kingdom. Taxes had to be managed. Trade routes required protection. Harvests needed careful supervision. Relationships with foreign powers demanded wisdom and patience. And always, the great shadow of Rome remained nearby. Yet despite these burdens, Cleopatra approached her duties with determination. Ancient writers often focused on her appearance, but many also spoke of something deeper. They described her intelligence. They admired her ability to speak many languages. They noted her charm, her wit, and her skill in conversation. People who met her often remembered the sound of her voice and the power of her personality. These qualities proved just as valuable as beauty. For a ruler needed more than fine clothing and jewels. A ruler needed wisdom. A ruler needed patience. And Cleopatra possessed both. Meanwhile, daily life across Egypt continued much as it always had. The Nile flooded and receded according to ancient rhythms. Farmers planted seeds within the rich black soil. Women prepared bread and beer for their families. Children chased one another through village streets. Shepherds guided flocks across dusty paths. Fishermen cast nets into quiet waters. And as evening approached, the sky often turned shades of orange and gold before fading gently into the deep blue of night. Life moved steadily onward. Within Alexandria, however, life possessed a different energy. The city itself was one of the wonders of the ancient world. Its broad avenues bustled with activity. Markets overflowed with goods from distant lands. Scholars discussed philosophy and science. Poets composed verses. Physicians studied medicine. Ships arrived daily from across the Mediterranean. And standing proudly above the harbor, the great lighthouse watched over everything. Its bright flame guided sailors safely through darkness. At night, its light seemed almost magical against the sea. Cleopatra ruled from this remarkable city. Her palace overlooked the water. Gardens filled with flowers and fountains offered peaceful places for rest. Marble columns supported elegant halls. Painted walls reflected the beauty of nature. Servants moved quietly through cool corridors. Musicians played soft melodies upon harps and flutes. And through open windows came the scent of the sea. Perhaps in quiet moments, Cleopatra walked through these gardens beneath the moonlight. Perhaps she paused beside fountains and listened to the sound of water. Perhaps she looked toward the harbor and watched distant ships disappearing into the darkness. No one can know such moments for certain. But even rulers must have cherished simple hours of peace amid lives filled with responsibility. During these years, Cleopatra and Julius Caesar developed a close relationship. Together, they shared important moments during a period of great change. Eventually, a son was born. He became known as Caesarion. His arrival brought joy to Cleopatra. Like mothers throughout history, she surely held hopes for her child. Perhaps she watched him sleep peacefully beneath soft linen blankets. Perhaps she smiled at his laughter. Perhaps she imagined the future that lay before him. Yet beyond the walls of the palace, the world remained uncertain. Rome itself was changing. Political tensions grew. Powerful men competed for influence. And eventually, tragedy struck. In the year 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated. News of his death spread across the Roman world. Shock and sorrow followed. For Cleopatra, the loss must have been deeply painful. The future she had imagined suddenly became uncertain once again. But she did not surrender to despair. Instead, she returned her attention to Egypt and to the responsibilities she carried. Years passed. Caesarion grew older. The kingdom continued to prosper. Trade flourished. The Nile continued its eternal journey. And life moved forward. Yet history had more changes waiting. In Rome, new leaders rose to prominence. Among them stood a man named Mark Antony. he was a skilled general and one of the most powerful figures in the Roman world. Eventually, fate brought him and Cleopatra together. Their meeting would become one of the most famous stories in history. Ancient writers later filled their accounts with romance and drama. Some stories grew larger with time. Legends often do. Yet behind those stories stood two powerful individuals living in extraordinary times. Cleopatra and Mark Antony formed both a political alliance and a personal bond. Together, they shared years that brought moments of happiness and companionship. They had children. They celebrated victories. They dreamed of the future. Perhaps during peaceful evenings, they sat together beneath the stars while musicians played softly nearby. Perhaps they sailed along the Nile, watching birds glide above the water. Perhaps they found comfort in one another amid the uncertainties surrounding them. For even the most powerful people seek companionship and understanding. And even kings and queens long for peace. Throughout these years, Cleopatra continued to rule wisely. She supported trade. She strengthened Egypt's economy. She maintained diplomatic relationships. She worked tirelessly to preserve her kingdom's independence. These responsibilities demanded constant attention. And through it all, she remained devoted to Egypt. But far away in Rome, another powerful figure was rising. His name was Octavian. Young, intelligent, and ambitious, he would later become known to history as Augustus. Relations between Octavian and Mark Antony grew increasingly strained. Tensions slowly deepened. Words became accusations. Distrust became hostility. And little by little, the possibility of peace began to fade. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. Across Egypt, ordinary people still harvested grain. Women still baked bread. Children still laughed and played. The stars still shone above the Nile. Yet beyond these peaceful scenes, powerful forces were moving toward conflict. And Cleopatra, the last great queen of Egypt, stood at the center of events that would soon bring an end to an age that had lasted for thousands of years. As waves gently touched the shores of Alexandria and the lighthouse cast its steady glow across the sea, the future remained uncertain. And the final chapter of ancient Egypt's royal story slowly approached beneath the quiet stars. The sea breezes that drifted across Alexandria carried familiar scents. Salt from the Mediterranean. Smoke from cooking fires. The fragrance of flowers growing within palace gardens. The scent of incense rising from temples where prayers had been offered for generations. Life within the city still followed its ordinary rhythms. Merchants opened their stalls at sunrise. Fishermen returned with their catches. Children ran through busy streets. Scribes copied documents with careful hands. Ships arrived and departed beneath the watchful gaze of the great lighthouse. And yet, beneath these peaceful routines, uncertainty had begun to settle over the kingdom. The years that Cleopatra spent beside Mark Antony brought both happiness and growing danger. Together, they shared hopes for the future. Together, they raised children. Together, they dreamed of preserving Egypt and maintaining their influence in a changing world. But far away in Rome, Octavian watched carefully. He understood the importance of power. He understood the importance of public opinion. And little by little, tensions between the two sides increased. Messages traveled across seas. Officials exchanged reports. Rumors spread. And throughout the Mediterranean world, people sensed that something important was approaching. Still, everyday life continued. Along the Nile, farmers harvested grain beneath the warm sun. Women prepared meals in simple homes made from mud brick. Potters shaped clay jars. Shepherds watched over their animals. Birds gathered among the reeds. And as evening arrived, families sat together beneath the stars. For ordinary people, peace remained precious. They wished only for stability. And throughout history, such hopes have often been shared by countless generations. Within her palace, Cleopatra continued her duties. She met with advisors. She examined reports. She listened to messengers arriving from distant places. She supervised matters concerning trade and government. And perhaps, in quiet moments, she spent time with her children. Perhaps she listened to their voices and laughter. Perhaps she watched the sunlight dance upon fountains within the gardens. Perhaps she found brief moments of comfort amid the growing uncertainty surrounding her world. No one can know these details. But such moments surely existed. For mothers and fathers, kings and queens, all share the simple human desire to protect those they love. Eventually, the tension between Octavian and Mark Antony could no longer be contained. War became unavoidable. The decisive struggle came in 31 BC. Near the coast of Greece, the two sides met in a great naval battle known today as the Battle of Actium. Ships filled the sea. Sails stretched beneath the wind. Commands echoed across the water. The outcome of the battle would shape the future of Egypt and Rome. When it ended, victory belonged to Octavian. The balance of power had changed. For Cleopatra and Mark Antony, difficult days lay ahead. They returned to Egypt. Alexandria remained beautiful. Its streets still bustled with activity. Its harbor still welcomed ships. Its libraries and markets still stood. The lighthouse still shone through the night. Yet the shadow of approaching defeat could no longer be ignored. As Octavian advanced toward Egypt, hope gradually faded. The kingdom that had endured for thousands of years stood upon the edge of its final chapter. And still, life itself continued. Morning followed night. Birds sang beside the Nile. The river flowed quietly northward. The stars appeared above the desert. Nature itself remained calm. The world did not stop. Perhaps during those final months, Cleopatra spent long evenings gazing across the sea. Perhaps she walked through familiar gardens where she had once found peace. Perhaps she remembered happier years. Perhaps she thought of Julius Caesar. Perhaps she thought of Mark Antony. Perhaps she thought most of all about her children and the uncertain future awaiting them. History preserves events. But feelings often remain hidden. And so we can only imagine the quiet thoughts that filled those final days. Eventually, tragedy unfolded. Mark Antony died. Ancient writers describe sorrow and grief surrounding his death. And soon afterward, Cleopatra herself faced the end of her long struggle. For centuries, stories have surrounded her final moments. Legends grew. Poets added details. Artists imagined scenes of beauty and sadness. Yet many aspects remain uncertain. Historians continue to discuss the exact circumstances. What remains certain is that in 30 BC, Cleopatra's life came to an end. She was only 39 years old. With her passing, an age that had lasted for more than 3,000 years quietly came to a close. Egypt became part of the Roman world. The time of the pharaohs ended. The crowns of ancient kings and queens passed into history. Temples still stood. The Nile still flowed. The pyramids still rose above the desert. But a chapter unlike any other had reached its conclusion. And yet, endings are rarely complete. For memories endure. Generations passed. Empires rose and vanished. Rome itself faded. New civilizations appeared. Languages changed. Religions spread across the world. And still, the names of Egypt's queens survived. Ahotep, Amos-Nefertari, Hatshepsut, Tai, Nefertiti, Nefertari, Taworit, Cleopatra. Their stories traveled across centuries. Some were remembered for courage, some for wisdom, some for devotion, some for beauty, some for mystery, and some for their determination to protect the land they loved. The desert winds continued to whisper across ancient temples. Sand slowly covered forgotten roads. Birds nested among broken columns. Moonlight illuminated statues weathered by time. And beneath the earth, hidden treasures waited patiently to be rediscovered. Thousands of years later, archaeologists would uncover tombs. Historians would study inscriptions. Artists would paint scenes inspired by ancient Egypt. Travelers would stand before temples in quiet wonder. And the memories of these remarkable women would live again. For though kingdoms fade and monuments weather, stories possess a quiet strength of their own. They travel gently through time. They wait patiently. And they speak softly to those willing to listen. Far above the Nile, the same stars that once shone upon Hatshepsut and Cleopatra still shine tonight. The moon still rises above the desert. The river still follows its ancient path. And somewhere within the silence of the Egyptian night, the echoes of these powerful queens seem to linger. Not loudly. Not with triumph or sorrow. But quietly. Like the sound of water moving gently beneath the moonlight. Like the soft whisper of wind across the sands. Like memories carried peacefully through the endless passage of time. And as the night grows deeper and the stars continue their silent journey across the heavens, ancient Egypt itself seems to rest once more beneath the calm and timeless sky. Even after the age of the pharaohs had passed into memory, Egypt itself remained. The Nile did not forget its path. The desert winds continued their endless journey. The sun rose each morning above the eastern horizon and slowly sank behind the western hills. And beneath those same skies that had watched over Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, and Cleopatra, generations yet unborn carried on with their lives. Time has a gentle way of changing everything. Cities grow quiet. Buildings crumble. Names fade. And yet some memories remain, resting patiently beneath layers of sand and silence. For many centuries after Cleopatra's death, the temples and monuments of ancient Egypt slowly changed. Some fell into ruin. Others became homes for birds and small animals. Sand drifted across abandoned roads. Palm trees continued to sway beside the river. Travelers passing through Egypt saw enormous statues rising from the earth and wondered about the people who had created them. Many stories were forgotten. Many names disappeared. Yet not all. Some memories survived. Priests and scholars copied ancient writings. Families passed down traditions. Travelers recorded what they saw. And little by little, the stories of Egypt's queens endured. Long after the palaces themselves had vanished, the stars still appeared above the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. Moonlight still touched the columns of Karnak. Morning sunlight still illuminated the great temple of Luxor. The world changed. But Egypt remained. And in quiet ways, the women who had once ruled there remained as well. Though centuries separated them from one another, each queen had lived beneath the same sky. Each had listened to the songs of birds beside the Nile. Each had watched sunsets turn the desert golden. Each had experienced moments of happiness, uncertainty, hope, and sorrow. Ahotep had helped preserve Egypt during dangerous times. Amos Nefertari had become a symbol of peace and stability. Hatshepsut had ruled with confidence and wisdom. Tai had guided kings and advised rulers. Nefertiti had stood at the center of one of Egypt's most mysterious chapters. Nefertari had been honored with extraordinary love and respect. Taworit had governed during uncertain years. And Cleopatra had witnessed the closing chapter of a civilization that had endured for thousands of years. Their lives had been different. Their challenges had been different. But all of them shared something precious. They possessed strength. Not always the strength of armies. Not always the strength of conquest. But the quieter strength of patience. The strength of wisdom. The strength of endurance. And perhaps that is why their names still echo across time. Throughout the centuries, the pyramids continued to watch over the desert. They stood through storms and changing seasons. They stood while empires rose and vanished. They stood beneath moonlight and beneath the heat of countless summers. Nearby, villages thrived. Farmers tended their crops. Children played beside the river. Boats moved slowly along the Nile. Life itself continued. And somewhere beneath the earth, hidden chambers slept in silence. Tombs rested undisturbed. Paintings remained untouched. Jewelry lay forgotten. Statues waited patiently. The sands of Egypt became guardians of memory. Thousands of years passed. Then, little by little, curious minds began searching for the past. Travelers from distant lands visited Egypt. Artists sketched temples and monuments. Scholars attempted to understand ancient inscriptions. And eventually, archaeologists arrived. Carefully, patiently, they brushed away layers of sand. Stone by stone. Fragment by fragment. They rediscovered pieces of a world that had once seemed lost forever. Ancient colors emerged once again. Names reappeared. Forgotten queens stepped quietly out of the shadows of history. People around the world listened with wonder. Who had Hatshepsut been? What wisdom had guided Queen Tai? What mysteries surrounded Nefertiti? What thoughts had filled Cleopatra's final days? Questions awakened. And though some answers remained hidden, the stories themselves came alive once more. Today, travelers stand before Hatshepsut's temple and feel the silence of the cliffs surrounding it. Visitors gaze upon the painted walls of Nefertari's tomb and marvel at colors that have survived across millennia. People from every corner of the world recognize the face of Nefertiti. And countless books continue to explore the remarkable life of Cleopatra. These queens, separated from us by thousands of years, still inspire quiet fascination. Not because they were perfect. Not because they possessed endless power. But because they were human. They lived. They hoped. They loved. They faced uncertainty. They made decisions. And they left behind traces of themselves in stone, in paint, and in memory. As evening settles over modern Egypt, much remains unchanged. The Nile still reflects the moonlight. Palm trees still sway in gentle breezes. Birds still gather among the reeds. And the stars that once shone above ancient temples continue their endless journey across the heavens. Perhaps somewhere within those quiet nights, the past feels very close. Perhaps the sounds carried by the wind seem familiar. Perhaps the silence itself remembers. For history does not disappear completely. It rests. It waits. And every so often, it whispers softly to those who pause long enough to listen. And so the stories of Egypt's powerful queens continue. Not with loud voices. Not with grand announcements. But with quiet dignity. like the river that gave life to their world, like the moonlight upon ancient stone, like the endless stars above the desert sky. Their memories drift gently through time, peaceful and enduring, carried forever by the timeless waters of the Nile. As centuries turned and the world continued to change, Egypt itself remained a land where the past and the present seemed to rest quietly beside one another. The great river still wound its way through the countryside. Fields still turned green with life. Date palms still swayed in the warm breeze. And every evening, as the last light faded from the sky, long shadows stretched across the desert, just as they had during the days of the ancient queens. Sometimes history is remembered through grand monuments. Sometimes it survives through stories. And sometimes it endures in smaller, quieter ways. In the shape of a carved necklace. In faded colors upon a wall. In a broken piece of pottery resting beneath the sand. Or in a name carefully written by a scribe thousands of years ago. Such names are precious. For names carry memories. And among the names preserved across the ages are those of remarkable women whose lives became woven into the story of ancient Egypt. Long after their earthly journeys had ended, the world around them continued to move gently forward. New generations planted crops beside the Nile. Caravans crossed the desert. Children learned from their parents. Families gathered beneath starlit skies. And above everything, the moon rose and set with quiet certainty. The temples themselves witnessed these endless changes. At Karnak, immense columns stood beneath the sun. At Luxor, statues greeted the morning light. Far to the south, Abu Simbel watched over the desert. And hidden among cliffs, the peaceful resting places of queens remained sheltered from the passing centuries. Birds nested among ancient stones. The wind whispered through broken doorways. And silence settled softly across places that had once been filled with voices and footsteps. Yet silence does not always mean forgetting. Sometimes silence protects memories. Sometimes it preserves beauty. And so the sands of Egypt became keepers of the past. Deep beneath the earth, painted chambers remained hidden. Jewels rested undisturbed. Statues waited patiently. Ancient writings slept in darkness. And time itself stood watch. Eventually, curious travelers arrived. They came by boat. They came by camel. They came from lands far beyond Egypt. Some simply admired the beauty around them. Others sketched temples and statues in notebooks. Many stood in quiet wonder before the pyramids. How old they seemed. How peaceful. How enduring. Even when storms swept across the desert, the pyramids remained. Even when kingdoms disappeared, they remained. Even when centuries passed like drifting clouds, they remained. And perhaps, in their silent way, they remembered the queens who had once lived beneath the same sky. The rediscovery of ancient Egypt unfolded slowly. Piece by piece. Year after year. Archaeologists worked patiently beneath the hot sun. They brushed away sand with careful hands. They recorded every detail. They studied fragments of stone and faded writings. And little by little, forgotten stories returned. A name carved upon a temple. A statue buried beneath rubble. A painted scene inside a hidden tomb. Each discovery became a gentle voice from the past. One by one, the queens emerged once more. Hatshepsut no longer stood forgotten beneath the cliffs of Deir el-Bahri. Nefertiti's brilliant tomb colors glowed once again. The face of Nefertiti captured the imagination of millions. Queen Ti's memory returned through remarkable discoveries. And Cleopatra, whose life had become wrapped in legend, continued to inspire countless historians and dreamers. Their stories spread across the world. Books were written. Museums displayed treasures. Artists created paintings. Travelers journeyed to Egypt with wonder in their hearts. And through it all, the ancient queens quietly reclaimed their place within human memory. Yet perhaps the most remarkable thing about these women is not their wealth. Not their jewelry. Not their palaces. Not even the crowns they wore. Perhaps it is their humanity. For behind every title stood a person. A daughter. A wife. A mother. A ruler. A friend. Someone who experienced joy and sorrow. Someone who lived beneath sunny skies and peaceful stars. Someone who listened to birds singing beside the Nile. Someone who watched the colors of sunset spread across the desert. Someone who hoped for peace. Someone who worried about the future. And someone who eventually became part of history itself. Their world was different from ours in many ways. And yet certain things remain timeless. Love. Family. Hope. Kindness. Patience. These things belong to every age. And perhaps that is why their stories still feel alive. Because although thousands of years separate us, the human heart changes very little. Even now, as night settles over Egypt, life continues beside the Nile. Fishermen return home. Children fall asleep. Palm trees sway gently in the breeze. The stars appear above the desert. And moonlight touches ancient stones with quiet tenderness. Somewhere beyond sight, hidden beneath layers of history, old temples rest peacefully. The painted walls of forgotten chambers remain silent. The statues stand patiently. And the memories of queens long gone drift softly through the darkness like whispers carried by the wind. For history does not rush. It moves slowly. Like the river. Like the changing seasons. Like the stars crossing the night sky. And perhaps, if one listens carefully enough, it becomes possible to imagine those distant days. The sound of sandals upon stone floors. The fragrance of lotus flowers floating upon calm water. The flickering light of oil lamps. The gentle music of harps played in palace halls. The quiet conversations beneath moonlit skies. And among those memories, the graceful figures of Egypt's powerful queens continue their timeless journey. Never hurried. Never forgotten. Forever watched over by the endless heavens above the peaceful waters of the Nile. There are certain places in the world where time seems to move differently. Egypt is one of those places. Morning sunlight still paints the desert hills with soft shades of gold. The Nile still reflects the colors of dawn. And as evening settles across the land, the air becomes cooler and quieter, inviting rest after the warmth of the day. Thousands of years have passed since the great queens walked among palaces and temples. Yet their world does not feel entirely gone. Fragments remain. Memories remain. And sometimes, within the silence of ancient places, the past seems very near. At Deir el-Bahri, where Queen Hatshepsut built her magnificent temple, the towering cliffs rise peacefully toward the sky. Long shadows stretch across the terraces. Birds circle above the valley. And when the morning sun touches the stone, the colors change slowly, revealing beauty that has endured through countless generations. Visitors often speak softly there. Perhaps because the place itself inspires calm. Perhaps because ancient stones seem to invite quiet reflection. Or perhaps because somewhere within those walls rests the memory of a woman who ruled wisely and patiently so many centuries ago. Far away, near the cliffs of Abu Simbel, the temples of Ramesses and Nefertari continue to stand beneath the southern sun. Their great statues gaze outward across the desert. The sky above remains vast and endless. And during the peaceful hours before sunset, warm light gently illuminates the carvings created by hands that vanished long ago. The temple dedicated to Nefertari still whispers of affection and honor. Its walls speak without words. Its beauty remains. And so does her memory. Meanwhile, beneath the cliffs of the Valley of the Queens, hidden chambers preserve remarkable colors. The tomb of Nefertari seems almost dreamlike. Blue ceilings sparkle with golden stars. Painted figures stand quietly upon the walls. The colors remain vivid even after thousands of years. Reds, blues, soft yellows, gentle greens. Visitors entering these chambers often feel a sense of wonder. Not loud excitement, but quiet amazement. For it feels as though time itself has paused. And somewhere beyond those painted walls rests the memory of a queen who was dearly loved. Elsewhere, the elegant face of Nefertiti continues to inspire fascination. Her famous bust, with its graceful features and tall blue crown, has become one of the most recognizable images from the ancient world. People from many nations come to gaze upon it. They study the calm expression. They admire the skill of the artist. And they wonder about the woman behind the image. Who was she? What thoughts filled her mind? What hopes did she carry? What worries accompanied her during those strange and mysterious years at Amarna? Many questions remain unanswered. And perhaps that mystery itself has become part of her lasting beauty. Queen Tai, too, emerged once more from history through remarkable discoveries. Archaeologists found traces of her life hidden beneath centuries of silence. Her name appeared again. Her image returned. And once more, the wise queen who advised kings stepped quietly back into human memory. The same happened with Ahotep. The same with Amos Nefertari. And the same with Taworit. Though less famous than others, their names survived. Not loudly. Not through endless stories. But quietly. Patiently. Like seeds resting beneath the earth until the time comes for them to bloom once more. And then there is Cleopatra. Perhaps no queen of Egypt has inspired more stories. Poets wrote about her. Artists painted her. Playwrights imagined her words. Historians debated her choices. Legends surrounded her life. Yet behind all these stories stood a woman who lived during extraordinary times. A ruler. A mother. A scholar. A queen determined to protect her kingdom. And though empires changed and centuries passed, her name endured. Such is the power of memory. Not every monument survives. Not every building remains. But stories possess their own kind of strength. They travel across generations. They cross oceans. They endure long after stone begins to crumble. And perhaps that is why these queens still seem alive within our imagination. Because history itself is not merely a list of names and dates. It is the memory of human lives. Lives filled with ordinary moments. Quiet mornings. Shared meals. Conversations beneath the stars. Walks through gardens. Songs played upon harps. Laughter among family. Moments of hope. Moments of sadness. And simple hours of peace. For even queens experienced such things. The crowns they wore did not separate them from the rhythms of life. They still watched the sun rise. They still listened to birds singing. They still gazed upon the moon. They still felt love. And they still dreamed. As modern Egypt continues its own journey, ancient and new stand side by side. Busy cities hum with life. Boats move along the Nile. Markets overflow with color and sound. And above everything, the same stars shine as they did thousands of years ago. Night after night. Season after season. Century after century. The heavens remain unchanged. Perhaps Hatshepsut once looked upward and admired those stars. Perhaps Nefertiti watched them from palace balconies. Perhaps Nefertari saw them reflected in quiet pools. Perhaps Cleopatra gazed toward them from Alexandria while sea breezes moved gently through the night. And now, those same stars continue their endless journey above the desert. Watching. Silent. Peaceful. As though time itself were only a river flowing gently onward. And beside that river, in memory and in history, the powerful queens of ancient Egypt continue to rest beneath the calm and eternal sky. As the centuries drifted quietly onward, the memory of ancient Egypt became something almost dreamlike. Travelers spoke of giant statues sitting patiently beneath the sun. They described temples filled with mysterious carvings. They marveled at the pyramids rising above the sands with silent dignity. And they wondered about the people who had once called this remarkable land their home. The answers, however, rested quietly beneath layers of time. And time itself can be a gentle keeper of secrets. For many generations, the language of the ancient Egyptians had been forgotten. The beautiful symbols carved upon temple walls and monuments could still be seen, but few people understood their meaning. Rows of birds. Eyes. Flowers. Reeds. Sacred animals. Mysterious signs covering walls and pillars. They appeared almost like pictures from a forgotten dream. The names of kings and queens remained hidden within these symbols. Waiting patiently. Waiting through long centuries. And then, slowly, understanding returned. Scholars devoted years to studying the ancient writing. Piece by piece. Word by word. And eventually, voices that had been silent for thousands of years began to speak again. Names emerged from stone. Hatshepsut. Amos Nefertari. Tai. Nefertari. Taworit. And many others. The past, which had once seemed distant and unreachable, became a little clearer. Ancient inscriptions described ceremonies and offerings. They spoke of temples and festivals. They preserved prayers and praises. And among them, they preserved the memories of remarkable women. People discovered that Egypt's queens had not simply stood beside kings. They had advised rulers. They had guided kingdoms. They had preserved stability. And in some cases, they had ruled as pharaohs themselves. This realization fascinated historians. For thousands of years, their stories had rested quietly beneath the sands. Now, they emerged once more into the light. Perhaps nowhere is the sense of quiet wonder stronger than in the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. These peaceful valleys rest beneath barren hills where the desert stretches endlessly beneath the sky. By day, sunlight warms the rocks. By night, stars fill the heavens. Silence settles over the landscape. And somewhere beneath the earth lie chambers carved by ancient hands. Hidden corridors. Painted walls. Resting places prepared with love and devotion. For the ancient Egyptians believed deeply in eternity. They believed life continued beyond death. They filled tombs with beautiful objects. Jewelry. Furniture. Clothing. Food. And carefully painted scenes meant to accompany loved ones into the next world. The ceilings often resembled the night sky. Golden stars upon deep blue backgrounds. Peaceful and eternal. And perhaps that is fitting. For stars themselves have always inspired feelings of wonder. The same stars that watched over Egypt's queens continue to shine tonight. They watched Ahotep during uncertain times. They watched Hatshepsut govern her kingdom. They watched Tai advise kings. They watched Nefertiti walk through the palaces of Amarna. They watched Nefertari celebrate festivals with Ramesses. And they watched Cleopatra gaze across the waters of Alexandria. Stars witness everything. Yet they speak only through silence. Modern visitors often find themselves deeply moved when they stand before these ancient places. Not because of noise. Not because of grandeur alone. But because history feels strangely peaceful. There is a calmness within Egypt. A quiet dignity. A sense that time itself moves more slowly among temples and ruins. Perhaps it is the rhythm of the Nile. Perhaps it is the vastness of the desert. Or perhaps it is simply the feeling of standing in places where countless generations have come and gone. Morning after morning. Year after year. Century after century. And still the land endures. Even the colors of Egypt seem timeless. The golden sands. The deep blue skies. The green ribbon of life beside the river. The white sails of boats drifting upon the Nile. The soft pinks and oranges of sunset. The silver glow of moonlight upon ancient stones. Such scenes would have been familiar to the queens themselves. Though separated from us by thousands of years, they saw many of the same things. They listened to the same birds. They felt the same desert breeze. They admired the same stars. And perhaps they found comfort in the same peaceful rhythms of nature. For nature changes slowly. The river still flows. The seasons still return. Lotus flowers still bloom. Palm trees still sway. And evening still arrives with gentle beauty. Sometimes, history feels less like something lost and more like something sleeping quietly. Never truly gone. Simply resting. Waiting for those willing to remember. And so the queens of ancient Egypt remain with us. Not in loud ways. Not through grand speeches. But through fragments. A statue. A painted wall. A carved inscription. A name preserved upon stone. These small pieces come together like stars forming constellations across the night sky. Individually, each one shines softly. Together, they tell a story. A story of courage. A story of wisdom. A story of devotion. A story of women whose lives became woven into the long and peaceful rhythm of the Nile. And as darkness settles gently over Egypt once more, the desert grows quiet. Birds find their resting places. The air becomes cooler. Moonlight spreads across temples and pyramids. And beneath the endless heavens, the memories of the powerful queens continue to drift softly through time. Unhurried. Undisturbed. And beautiful in their quiet endurance. As night deepens over the Nile, the world becomes quieter. The sounds of busy markets fade away. Fishing boats return to shore. Oil lamps glow softly within homes. Families settle down after the work of the day. And high above the desert, countless stars shine with the same gentle brilliance they possessed thousands of years ago. The stars have always been faithful companions to Egypt. Long before written history, people gazed upward in wonder. They watched the movements of the heavens. They marked the passing seasons. They measured time. And they found comfort in the quiet order of the night sky. The queens of ancient Egypt knew these same skies. When Ahotep lived during years of uncertainty, the stars still appeared each evening. When Amos Nefertari walked through palace gardens, they shone above her. When Hatshepsut stood within the terraces of Deir el-Bahari, they stretched endlessly overhead. And when Cleopatra watched the waves of Alexandria beneath moonlight, those same stars reflected upon the sea. Time changed many things, but not the heavens. Perhaps that is why ancient Egyptians loved the stars so deeply. They represented eternity. Something constant. Something peaceful. Within royal palaces, evenings often unfolded slowly. After the heat of the day, cool breezes moved through open courtyards. Servants lit lamps one by one. Soft music drifted through the halls. Perfumed oil scented the air. And beyond the walls, fountains murmured gently beneath the moon. Queens and kings, despite their responsibilities, surely cherished these quiet hours. Moments when reports and ceremonies had ended. Moments when they could simply rest. Perhaps Hatshepsut sat beside a reflecting pool and listened to the sounds of water. Perhaps Queen Tai shared calm conversations with Amenhotep III while musicians played softly nearby. Perhaps Nefertari admired the moonlight shining across the gardens of the palace. Perhaps Cleopatra stood upon a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. Such moments belong to imagination. Yet they remind us that history is made not only of great events, but also of simple evenings and peaceful hours. Ordinary moments. Moments shared by all people. For even rulers needed rest. Even rulers enjoyed music. Even rulers found comfort in family and friendship. And even rulers paused to admire the beauty of the night sky. Throughout Egypt, ordinary life followed similar rhythms. Villages became quiet after sunset. Animals settled down. Children drifted to sleep. Mothers and fathers sat together beneath the stars. Stories were told. Bread baked for the following day. And slowly, silence spread across the countryside. The Nile itself never truly slept. Its waters continued their ancient journey. Reeds swayed gently along the riverbanks. Frogs sang quietly. Birds rested among the marshes. And moonlight shimmered upon the surface of the water. The river had witnessed everything. It had seen the first villages rise. It had nourished the builders of pyramids. It had carried boats filled with grain, stone, and travelers. It had reflected the temples of Karnak and Luxor. And it had accompanied every queen whose story has traveled through these pages. The Nile knew Ahotep. It knew Hatshepsut. It knew Tai and Nefertiti. It knew Nefertari and Taworit. And it knew Cleopatra. Generation after generation, the river remained calm, patient, eternal. Perhaps that is why so many ancient Egyptians believed life itself moved in cycles. The sun rose. The sun set. The moon waxed and waned. The river flooded and receded. The seasons changed. And life itself followed those same gentle patterns. Nothing rushed. Everything moved according to its own rhythm. Even history. Today, travelers who journey along the Nile often speak of its peaceful beauty. They watch palm trees pass slowly by. They observe white birds standing among the reeds. They admire temples glowing beneath the morning sun. And perhaps, without fully realizing it, they experience scenes familiar to people who lived thousands of years ago. The world changes. Yet some things endure. The breeze. The water. The stars. And memory. Memory itself is a quiet river. It carries stories from one generation to another. It preserves names. It protects moments. And though details may fade, the essence remains. The powerful queens of ancient Egypt continue to live within that memory. Not because they sought immortality. Not because they imagined people thousands of years later would speak their names. but because their lives became part of something larger. Part of the endless story of humanity. Part of the story of Egypt. Part of the story carried by the Nile. As the moon climbs higher above the desert, ancient temples rest peacefully beneath its silver light. Columns cast long shadows. Statues remain still and silent. The sands shift slowly beneath the wind. And somewhere within the quiet darkness, the past seems to breathe softly. Not loudly. Not urgently. But gently. Like the whisper of reeds beside the river. Like the sound of distant water. Like a memory carried peacefully through time. And so, beneath the endless stars and beside the timeless Nile, the queens of ancient Egypt continue their quiet journey through history, watched over by the same heavens that have always shone above the land they once called home. As one century quietly followed another, the ancient world slowly gave way to new ages. Kingdoms changed. Empires expanded and disappeared. Languages evolved. New cities rose where older ones had faded. And still, through all of these changes, Egypt remained a land where the past seemed to rest gently beside the present. The desert never hurried. The Nile never rushed. And perhaps because of this, memories themselves seemed to linger longer there. In many places around the world, time erases almost everything. But Egypt has always possessed a remarkable way of preserving small pieces of yesterday. Dry sands protected painted walls. Hidden chambers guarded delicate treasures. Ancient writings survived. And because of this quiet protection, voices from long ago were able to reach distant generations. The voice of Hatshepsut. The voice of Tai. The voice of Nefertiti. The voice of Cleopatra. Not through sound. Not through spoken words. But through monuments. Through symbols. Through fragments left behind by hands that vanished thousands of years ago. Sometimes those fragments are very small. A broken bracelet. A faded line of writing. A carved flower. A painted bird. Yet even the smallest pieces help complete the story. Much like stars in the sky. One star alone shines softly. But together, countless stars create something beautiful. The same is true of history. Each discovery adds another light. Another memory. Another glimpse into lives long past. The women who ruled Egypt lived in different centuries. Some were separated by hundreds of years. They never met one another. And yet, in a quiet way, they shared many things. They shared the same river. They shared the same sun. They shared the same stars. And they shared the responsibility of protecting their kingdom. Ahotep had lived through uncertainty. Amos Nefertari had witnessed renewal. Hatshepsut had brought prosperity. Tai had guided kings with wisdom. Nefertiti had lived during years of mystery and change. Nefertari had been honored with deep affection. Taworit had ruled during difficult times. And Cleopatra had witnessed the final days of ancient Egypt's independence. Different lives. Different centuries. Different challenges. Yet all were connected by the long and peaceful rhythm of the Nile. Perhaps this rhythm shaped the people of Egypt. The river taught patience. The seasons taught balance. The stars taught wonder. And the endless desert taught humility. For no matter how powerful a ruler became, the vast sky above and the silent sands beyond the river reminded everyone that they were part of something much greater. Perhaps this understanding brought comfort. Perhaps it inspired wisdom. Perhaps it encouraged kindness. No one can know for certain. But the ancient Egyptians themselves often spoke about harmony. About balance. About order. These ideas touched every part of life, from farming and family to temples and kingship. And the queens themselves became guardians of that harmony. Some did so quietly, some did so boldly, but each contributed in her own way. Today, when people think of ancient Egypt, they often imagine pyramids first, or perhaps mummies, or golden treasures. But beneath those images lie stories. Stories of people. Stories of families. Stories of hopes and dreams. And among those stories stand the queens. Not merely as figures carved in stone, but as human beings. Women who walked beneath palm trees. Women who listened to music. Women who loved their children. Women who faced uncertainty. Women who carried burdens and responsibilities. Women who watched sunsets beside the Nile. Perhaps Hatshepsut once paused to admire lotus flowers floating peacefully upon a pool. Perhaps Tai listened to birds singing in the gardens of her palace. Perhaps Nefertiti smiled at the laughter of her daughters. Perhaps Nefertari enjoyed quiet evenings while harps played softly in the background. Perhaps Cleopatra stood beneath moonlight and listened to the waves of Alexandria. History preserves the grand moments, but life itself is often found within the smaller ones. The sound of footsteps upon stone. The scent of fresh bread. The coolness of evening air. The warmth of sunlight in the morning. The comfort of familiar voices. These simple things connect us across time. Thousands of years separate us from these queens. Yet certain experiences remain unchanged. The beauty of a clear night sky. The peace of flowing water. The joy of family. The hope for tomorrow. These things belong to every age. And perhaps that is why their stories still feel so alive. For beneath the crowns and jewels were hearts much like our own. Hearts that hoped. Hearts that worried. Hearts that loved. As night settles over modern Egypt, the great river continues its endless journey. Boats glide upon calm waters. Palm trees cast gentle shadows. Birds settle into silence. And the moon rises once again above ancient temples. The same moon. The same stars. The same quiet beauty. And somewhere within the peaceful embrace of the Egyptian night, the memories of those remarkable queens continue to rest. Not forgotten. Not lost. But carried gently through time. Like the waters of the Nile itself. Steady. Peaceful. And eternal. If one were to rise before dawn in ancient Egypt, there would be a special kind of silence. Not complete silence, for nature itself is never entirely quiet. There would be the soft rustling of reeds beside the Nile. The distant sound of water moving gently along its ancient course. The occasional call of a bird awakening before sunrise. And above everything, the fading stars would slowly surrender their places to the first pale light of morning. These peaceful hours belonged to a world that moved more slowly. A world where people measured time not by clocks, but by the rising sun, the flooding river, and the changing seasons. The queens of Egypt lived within that rhythm. Long before servants stirred within palace halls, long before markets filled with voices, and long before the warmth of the day spread across the land, the world itself awakened quietly. Perhaps Queen Hatshepsut enjoyed such mornings. Perhaps she stepped into cool courtyards while the sky still held traces of night. Perhaps she listened to fountains and watched lotus flowers beginning to open beneath the first rays of sunlight. The fragrance of damp earth and flowering plants would have filled the air. And beyond the palace walls, ordinary life was also beginning. Women prepared grain for bread. Fishermen untied their boats. Farmers gathered their tools. Children slowly woke from sleep. Goats and sheep stirred within their shelters. The whole land seemed to stretch and awaken beneath the promise of another day. In royal households, mornings followed careful routines. Servants moved quietly. Fresh water was brought in polished jars. Linen garments were prepared. Jewelry boxes were opened. Perfumed oils and cosmetics were arranged with care. Musicians sometimes played gentle melodies. And scribes waited patiently with papyrus scrolls and brushes ready for the day's work. The responsibilities of queens were many. There were ceremonies to attend, officials to advise, priests to consult, reports to hear, and countless decisions to make. Yet even amid these duties, moments of calm surely existed. Perhaps Queen Tai sat beneath the shade of sycamore trees while listening to the songs of birds. Perhaps Amos Nefertari found peace within temple gardens filled with flowers and quiet pools. Perhaps Nefertari paused beside an open window and admired the endless blue sky stretching above the Nile. History cannot preserve every moment. But life itself is made of such moments. Simple things. Quiet things. Beautiful things. And while royal life possessed elegance and luxury, ordinary Egyptians also found joy in everyday routines. Bread baked slowly over clay ovens. Fresh dates and figs were gathered. Families shared meals together. Children laughed during games. Neighbors spoke with one another beneath the shade of trees. Festivals brought music and dancing. And in the evenings, stories passed from one generation to the next. Life was not always easy. There were hardships. There were worries. There were seasons of uncertainty. But there were also countless moments of peace. Moments that rarely appear in history books. Moments that belong to the heart rather than to monuments. Perhaps that is why the ancient world still feels strangely familiar. Because beneath the crowns and titles, people lived lives shaped by simple human experiences. And the queens themselves were no exception. Cleopatra, despite her intelligence and power, surely knew moments of quiet reflection. Nefertiti, despite the mysteries surrounding her life, surely experienced ordinary hours with her children. Hatshepsut, despite ruling as pharaoh, surely watched sunsets with the same wonder felt by countless others. For nature itself belongs equally to kings and common people. The moon shines for everyone. The stars belong to everyone. And the sound of water flowing beneath moonlight brings peace to all who listen. Throughout the long history of Egypt, the Nile remained the greatest companion. It fed the fields. It carried trade. It connected cities. And it inspired poetry, songs, and prayers. The river itself became almost like a living presence within Egyptian life. Patient. Reliable. Eternal. People trusted the Nile. And in return, the river sustained them. Generation after generation. Century after century. Even today, standing beside the Nile at sunset brings a sense of calm. Palm trees sway gently. Birds glide above the water. The sky slowly changes color. And as darkness arrives, the first stars begin to appear. One can almost imagine ancient boats moving silently across the river. One can almost hear distant voices carried by the breeze. One can almost feel the presence of the countless people who once stood upon those same shores. Farmers, sailors, priests, craftsmen, children, kings, and queens. Their footsteps are gone. Their voices have faded. Yet something of them remains. Not only in monuments. Not only in statues. but in the land itself. In the rhythm of the river. In the silence of the desert. And in the endless sky stretching above Egypt. As night deepens and cool air settles across the valleys, the ancient temples rest quietly beneath the moon. Columns cast gentle shadows. Stars shimmer overhead. And the memories of Egypt's remarkable queens drift softly through time. Like the fragrance of lotus flowers carried by a breeze. Like the reflection of moonlight upon calm water. Like a peaceful dream that never completely fades. Their stories continue. Slowly. Quietly. Endlessly. Carried forever by the timeless rhythm of the Nile. There is something deeply peaceful about rivers. They do not hurry. They do not compete with the wind or struggle against the stars. They simply continue, day after day, season after season, following paths older than memory itself. And among all the rivers of the world, few have shaped human life as profoundly as the Nile. For the people of ancient Egypt, the Nile was more than water. It was life. It was comfort. It was abundance. It was the quiet promise that tomorrow would come. The powerful queens of Egypt understood this well. Whether they ruled during times of peace or uncertainty, they lived within the gentle rhythm created by the river. Its presence could be felt everywhere. In the fields of wheat swaying beneath the sun. In the songs of fishermen returning home. In the cool jars of water resting inside village houses. And in the palace gardens where lotus flowers floated peacefully upon still pools. Morning after morning, the Nile reflected the first light of dawn. And evening after evening, it mirrored the colors of the setting sun. The river saw everything. It witnessed the rise of dynasties. It watched temples being built. It carried the boats of merchants and travelers. And it reflected the stars above generations too numerous to count. Perhaps Queen Ahotep once stood beside its waters while thinking of the uncertain future facing Egypt. Perhaps Amos Nefertari watched boats drifting peacefully upon its surface during years of renewal and prosperity. Perhaps Hatshepsut admired the river from the terraces of her magnificent temple. And perhaps Cleopatra herself sailed upon its waters, surrounded by soft breezes and the sounds of birds calling from the reeds. These women lived in different centuries. Yet the Nile connected them all. It became a thread running through their stories. A quiet companion. A faithful witness. The villages along its banks possessed their own beauty. Most homes were simple. Built from mud bricks and shaded by palm trees, they offered shelter from the heat of the day. Inside, woven mats covered floors. Clay jars stored water and grain. Small oil lamps provided light after sunset. Families gathered together for meals. Bread, vegetables, fish, dates, and figs formed much of their diet. Simple foods. Honest foods. Meals prepared with care. And while queens lived within palaces, they too depended upon the same river and the same harvests. The lives of rulers and ordinary people were connected in countless ways. When the Nile flooded generously, everyone rejoiced. Fields became fertile. Granaries filled. Trade prospered. And the kingdom itself grew stronger. But when the river's waters were less generous, concerns spread. Farmers worried. Officials took careful records. And rulers sought ways to preserve balance and order. Thus, the responsibilities carried by queens were not distant from everyday life. Their decisions affected villages and cities. Families and fields. Children and harvests. The well-being of the kingdom itself. Perhaps this understanding inspired many queens to rule with patience and wisdom. For leadership is not merely about power. It is about responsibility. It is about service. And throughout Egyptian history, many queens embraced those responsibilities with quiet dignity. Meanwhile, the seasons continued their endless cycle. The flooding season arrived. The waters spread across the land. Then came planting. Seeds were carefully placed into the rich soil. And later, harvest season brought abundance and gratitude. These rhythms repeated year after year. Generation after generation. People learned patience from nature. They learned trust. And perhaps they learned humility. For no human being, no matter how powerful, could command the river or the stars. One could only live in harmony with them. This idea of harmony touched every part of Egyptian life. Harmony within families. Harmony within communities. Harmony between rulers and the people. Harmony between humanity and nature. It was a beautiful idea. And perhaps one reason why the civilization endured for so long. As the sun crossed the sky each day, shadows shifted slowly across temples and monuments. The great columns of Karnak changed color with the light. The cliffs surrounding Deir el-Bahri glowed warmly in the evening. And the statues of Abu Simbel stood silently beneath endless blue skies. Time itself seemed slower there. More gentle. More patient. And perhaps the queens themselves carried something of that patience within their hearts. For ruling Egypt required more than ambition. It required endurance. It required wisdom. And often, it required courage. Not always the courage found upon battlefields. But the quieter courage found within difficult decisions. The courage to guide others. The courage to endure uncertainty. The courage to preserve peace. Such courage is not always celebrated loudly. Yet it leaves lasting impressions. And perhaps that is why the memories of these women continue to endure. Because true strength often speaks softly. Like flowing water. Like moonlight upon stone. Like the gentle breeze that moves through the reeds beside the Nile. Even now, as modern boats glide along the river and the lights of cities reflect upon the water, the ancient spirit of Egypt feels close. Birds still gather among the marshes. Palm trees still sway. Sunsets still paint the sky with colors that would have been familiar to Cleopatra and Hatshepsut. And when night arrives, the stars once again appear above the desert. Watching quietly. Patiently. As they always have. And somewhere within the peaceful silence between river and sky, the stories of Egypt's queens continue their endless journey. Not lost. Not forgotten. But flowing onward. Like the Nile itself. Steady. Gentle. And eternal. There are moments, especially in the quiet hours of evening, when the world seems to slow down. The warmth of the day begins to fade. Birds return to their resting places. The wind softens. And shadows lengthen across the earth, stretching gently beneath the golden colors of the setting sun. In ancient Egypt, these hours must have been especially beautiful. The sky above the Nile often changed slowly from bright blue to shades of amber, rose, and violet. Palm trees became dark silhouettes against the horizon. And the calm waters of the river reflected the heavens like polished glass. For countless generations, people paused to admire these peaceful transitions. Farmers returning from the fields. Fishermen guiding their boats home. Children finishing their games. And queens within their palaces, perhaps taking a few quiet moments to themselves before night settled fully over the land. Life in the royal courts of Egypt was often busy. Messengers arrived. Ceremonies were held. Officials discussed matters of trade and government. Priests conducted sacred rituals. Servants moved quietly through elegant halls. And throughout the day, countless duties demanded attention. But even in such lives, moments of rest surely existed. Perhaps Hatshepsut sat beneath the shade of a sycamore tree while cool water flowed nearby. Perhaps Queen Tai enjoyed conversations with trusted companions as musicians played softly upon harps. Perhaps Nefertiti walked through gardens filled with flowers while her daughters laughed and played. Perhaps Nefertari watched the moon rise over the desert and listened to the distant sounds of evening birds. And perhaps Cleopatra, from the terraces of Alexandria, looked out toward the sea and felt the gentle breeze upon her face. These images belong partly to imagination. Yet they remind us of something simple and timeless. Even the most powerful people cherish quiet moments. Even rulers find peace in beauty. And even queens pause to admire the stars. Throughout Egypt, ordinary evenings unfolded with familiar comfort. Families gathered together. Simple meals were shared. Fresh bread and vegetables filled the air with warm scents. Oil lamps cast soft golden light upon walls. Grandparents told stories to children. Neighbors exchanged greetings. And slowly, one by one, the stars appeared overhead. Ancient Egyptians loved stories. Stories about gods. Stories about heroes. Stories passed from generation to generation. Some tales were spoken beside cooking fires. Others were shared beneath moonlit skies. And perhaps some stories survived for hundreds of years, changing slightly with each new voice that told them. Storytelling itself became part of the rhythm of life. A way of preserving memories. A way of bringing comfort. And perhaps, long after certain queens had passed from the world, stories about them continued to be told. Whispered softly. Remembered with affection. Shared beneath the stars. The world of ancient Egypt was filled with sounds that have long since faded. The music of flutes. The gentle melodies of harps. The voices of merchants in busy markets. The laughter of children. The calls of birds rising from the reeds. The steady splash of oars moving through the Nile. These sounds once surrounded the queens. They were part of daily life. Part of ordinary moments that history books rarely describe. And yet, such moments are often the most precious. For life itself is made not only of great victories and famous names. Life is made of mornings and evenings. Meals and conversations. Laughter and silence. The smell of flowers. The warmth of sunlight. And the comfort of familiar faces. Perhaps this is why the queens of Egypt continue to feel so real despite the passing of thousands of years. Because beneath their crowns and jewelry, they experienced many of the same things that people cherish today. They loved. They worried. They hoped. They rested. And they found beauty in the world around them. As the centuries passed and ancient Egypt slowly transformed, many monuments weathered beneath the wind and sun. Colors faded. Stones cracked. And some names were forgotten. Yet memory itself proved stronger than silence. The stories endured. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough. Enough for future generations to rediscover. Enough for historians to piece together fragments of the past. Enough for people around the world to remember the names of remarkable women who once ruled beside the Nile. And perhaps that is one of history's greatest gifts. Not perfection. Not certainty. But connection. A quiet bridge stretching across time. Connecting one life to another. Connecting one age to the next. Connecting us to people who lived beneath different skies yet shared the same hopes and dreams. As darkness settles gently over Egypt once more, the stars continue their ancient journey. The moon rises above temples and palm trees. The river flows without hurry. And somewhere within the peaceful silence of the night, the memories of Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, Nefertari, Taworit, Cleopatra, and all the remarkable queens who came before them remain. Like soft echoes. Like distant songs. Like the reflection of moonlight upon calm water. Endless. Peaceful. And forever carried by the quiet and timeless heart of the Nile. And so, the long story slowly comes to rest. Not with silence that feels empty, but with the kind of silence that feels full, like a room after a gentle conversation has ended, or like the surface of the Nile when the wind finally stops moving across it. Ancient Egypt does not truly disappear. It simply changes its shape in time. It becomes sand beneath the feet of travelers. It becomes stone waiting under sunlight. It becomes ink on old scrolls and fragments of carved names that still survive against all odds. And it becomes memory. Soft, distant memory. Carried forward not by empires, but by people who pause long enough to look back. The queens who once lived along the Nile are no longer standing in palaces. No longer hearing the footsteps of servants in marble halls. No longer watching the river from painted balconies. But they are still here in another way. In the quiet endurance of history. In the stories that were never fully lost. In the way the human mind still returns to them, again and again, across centuries. Ahotep. Amos Nefertari. Hatshepsut. Nefertiti. Nefertari. Taworit. Cleopatra. Different lives. Different centuries. Different endings. And yet all part of the same long, flowing river of time. Now, the Nile continues as it always has. The desert remains patient and still. The stars continue their slow, endless journey across the night sky. And somewhere in that quiet space between earth and heaven, history rests gently. Not gone. Not broken. Just, peaceful. Like water settling after a long ripple. Like the last light of evening fading softly into night. And as everything grows still, the story does not truly end. It simply drifts onward. Quietly. Endlessly. Into the calm of time.